There you go.
Great. And here comes Emily Roscoe. Good morning, everyone. It is Thursday, October 24th, and this is a meeting of the Clean Heat Standard Technical Advisory Group for the Public Utility Commission. I'm Rick Weston, chair of the group. Welcome all. Thanks for your time and efforts. Couple things we need to start with. Let me just do the usual housekeeping. Love everybody to stay muted while not speaking. Unmute, of course, when you are identified for speaking. Tag members, we like it if you keep your video on as much as you can. I understand you can't always. And members of the public, keep your video off until you are named for speaking. I must have said the wrong date. It's October 3rd. I don't know what I said, but yes, it's October 3rd. We have a quorum. Oh, and one other thing. I'd like to remind folks that we don't use the chat for public comment. We only use the chat for primarily for noting URLs and links and that sort of stuff. Okay, today we have with us Ben Potsker of EVT, along of course, along with Emily Roscoe. And as I think you may have all seen in the correspondence and the filings at the PUC, Alec Anzac is now representing the Department of Public Service. Welcome, Alec. TJ, of course, is going to keep an eye on everything as well. It's great to have you here. And I think Brian, is Molly with us from ANR today?
No, just me today from ANR.
Great. Okay. The first order of business is you've seen the agenda. Is there anything that anyone would like to add to the agenda if we can? Okay. And the next order of business is the review and approval of the minutes of our September 19th meeting. Is there any discussion about them before we consider a motion to approve them? Any changes necessary? Okay, if not, a motion to approve them would be terrific.
So moved.
Okay, motion made. All in favor, signify by raising your hands. Great. All those opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. Great. Thank you very much. Deirdre, I'm going to turn to you for updates from the PUC.
Sounds good. So kind of first and foremost, so the commission released a number of things on Tuesday, the 1st, most significant of which is the draft rule. But there are a few things in addition to the draft rule. One important thing is the status report, the companion document that goes alongside the rule, which kind of explains what is there and what isn't, and what to kind of expect going forward with the CHS design process. We also included the EAG's equity rubric alongside the rule, with the acknowledgement that given this is still being developed, it can be difficult to use at some point, but it's important that that was included. We also scheduled 2 opportunities in addition to, the 30-day written comment period. So written comments on the rule are due November 1st, but there's also 2 opportunities within the month to provide feedback. The first one is this coming Monday from 10 to 12. The intention of that workshop is really to kind of work through the language of the rule and have participants provide feedback on specific sections. And then the second opportunity is a public hearing set for October 30th in the evening from 6:30 to 9. And that's more geared towards a wider spectrum of feedback. We kind of expect general comments alongside, a variety of other kinds of feedback. It would still include an overview of the rule and status report, but then mostly allow for verbal comments from the public. And then there was a third thing scheduled, which is a workshop centered around the economic analysis that the commission is charged with submitting alongside the check back report due in January. And that is scheduled for Tuesday, October 15th at 1:30. The idea here is that we have some inputs to use in the economic analysis. We have the potential study, we have ERG's previous thermal report, and kind of getting feedback on how to incorporate that into the economic analysis, what assumptions to be used, that kind of thing. So I think those were the main things released on the first. And then just quickly wanted to mention in regards to Opinion Dynamics' latest deliverables. The written responses to the initial round of questions were shared last night, as were the decarbonization summary tables. I'm sure most of us have not had a chance to really dig through those materials, but just wanted to mention that those have now been circulated, and that Opinion Dynamics has asked for kind of pencils down on feedback to the TRM on the 11th, October 11th, so that they can kind of work on the next draft that they have for the TRM. So seems like we're getting there. I think the majority of that is happening today, has already been sent along to OD, but kind of implementing the 11th so that they can incorporate the feedback from TAG into the next draft.
Right. Matt.
Thank you, Deidre. Thank you, Rick. So one of the things in the status report that stuck out to me is because the cleaning standard introduces additional regulatory hurdles and costs, and it identifies what those are and those challenges. It says the commission is considering other options to achieve Vermont's greenhouse gas emission reduction goals for thermal sector. I'm assuming, but want to clarify, that this means something other than a clean heat standard as required by Act 18 or as suggested by Act 18? And is that something that the commission wants feedback on from either the TAG or from the public in one of the scheduled hearings coming up? Thanks.
Yep, that's a good question. I know that, the alternative that's there in the status report, the companion document, is not fleshed out. So I think a lot of that is going to be done. More details are going to be involved in the check back report to the legislature in January, and kind of gauging interest in an alternative, I think, in the legislative session. So in terms of TAG feedback there, I'm going to default to no right now, but I'll get back to the group on how and if we would like feedback on the alternative or a different suggestion that doesn't align exactly with statute.
Right. Matt, before I go to you, Emily, Matt, in giving it the little thought that I've given it since I saw that section in the report, we're referring, by the way, to section 5 in the companion document that was issued on Monday afternoon or Tuesday afternoon. Matt, it seems to me that whatever gets proposed and adopted or not by the legislature, and one imagines that there's going to be a lot of work on these issues by the legislature. It seems to me that the TAG's work, at least for now, remains unchanged. Certainly, we're bound by Act 18, but I think many of the issues that we're dealing with here would come up in any other thermal emissions program. So, so when I saw that, I was, I was intrigued, to say the least, but I took stock in this notion that many of the technical issues are still, they remain unchanged.
I just want to say I agree with that. Thank you, Rick.
Yeah. Emily, Roscoe.
Thank you. Deidre, I just wanted to confirm that the November 11th date was for group feedback, or were you looking for if there's any TAG individual feedback to send to you, to send to Opinion Dynamics?
So I think that would probably be inclusive. So October 11th, so it's even sooner. So,
Right, sorry.
um, yeah. But I think that would be inclusive of individual or group feedback. I think probably the group has given the subgroup meeting last week. That might be the last round for the TRM feedback from the tag. But if individual members have elements of feedback after today's meeting, send them to me, I think, before the 11th. Close of business on the 11th would be great.
Thank you.
Is that about it? Any other questions? Okay, Deirdre, thank you. Okay, now we're turning to the main event. We've got Opinion Dynamics here. We received documents from the PUC and Opinion Dynamics yesterday. If you've had a chance to review them, great. I'd be impressed if you all have. I haven't gotten through them all myself. We can proceed. Here's how I propose proceeding is that we turn to Opinion Dynamics now to take us through their responses to our questions in the memo. Does that seem like an appropriate starting point? I'm putting that question to Opinion Dynamics in particular. And if it makes sense, we can put up the memo on the screen. Yes, Emily Levin.
I do think that makes sense, but before we dive into that, I just wanted to make sure that I and perhaps others have a clear understanding of what we're doing when, especially if our TRM feedback is all due by the 11th. I'm just trying to make sense of the kind of outstanding threads we have. So we've provided questions to Opinion Dynamics and they have answers, but then we're also writing up tagged feedback on certain issues. And for some of those issues, we have proposals to discuss, and I don't know if we're supposed to vote today, but then for other issues, like the issues that Floyd and others have agreed to present an A&R are being bumped to the October 17th meeting. But if feedback is due by I'm just trying to understand like what we're actually trying to accomplish and deliver at this meeting versus the next one, and how that relates to the deadline that Deirdre just shared.
Well, the discussion of next steps and how we get further feedback to OD, I was reserving toward the end of this section.
Okay.
But yes, those are all questions. How are we going to move forward exactly or need to be answered? I think it might be a better use of, well, we've got OD here now. Let's hear from them, and then we can work through how we want to proceed. We've got some thoughts on how to proceed, but that was my approach.
Okay.
If that is okay.
Yeah, as long as we I'm just trying to make sure I don't want to do all this work and then have it be delivered too late for it to be.
No, we understand. October 11th sounds like an important date. Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. That sounds like fun. I just wanted to know, there's 3 response memos from Opinion Dynamics. Are we going through all of them? And in what order?
Ooh, geez.
There's yours, there's the forestry ones, and then there's Emily's.
Right. Emily's I hadn't looked at yet. I was thinking of the forestry and ours. Catherine, did you have a thought?
Oh, I thought you were going to talk about the decarbonization spreadsheet and others. So yes, hopefully if we can get through all of them, that would be ideal.
Okay, I just heard the chair say 1, and I wanted to make sure that we were going to cover them all.
The intention is to cover them all. I was just starting with that one.
I mean, that is really the dedication of this entire meeting, pretty much.
Right.
Well, far be it from me to hold up the proceedings any further.
So we have Joe and Kevin here from Opinion Dynamics, and I wondered what your reaction is to leading us through the responses. Would you be up for that? And do you have them ready to share on your screen, or would you like me to do that?
I think that works for us. Yeah, we can share from our screens. Does that
Okay,
sound
great.
good, Kevin?
Does.
And we'll try to manage the time amongst the four items in particular, but we'll just keep an eye on the clock. We've allocated 2 hours for this.
Great. Where are we starting? Which memo?
Well, start with the one from me. You may as well the 5-pager.
Okay, on the installed measures.
Yeah. Is it only
Okay.
our installed measures
Yes.
primarily?
All right, let's see if I can share my screen. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yep. Oh,
Joe, I think we're looking at maybe the wrong screen. If we see your Teams channel,
Okay.
there you go.
Okay, sorry about that.
Thanks.
Okay.
No, I think this is, see, it is confusing. This is the new set of questions on the installed measures. I think, Rick, are you talking about the prior responses on the fuel measures?
yes. I'm sorry. That's why I was confused for a moment. Yeah. The one. Let me pull up mine. There's so many memos.
There's been a glut of information coming back to you all and us trying to get responses. So we'll get ourselves squared away as well.
No, and we appreciate it. Mine was dated the 17th, and you've got responses on October 2nd. Mine went to Deirdre.
Joe, here's the link. Apologies on our end. We were planning to discuss the installed measures to start off, so we're just
Well,
trying
why
to.
don't we? It's all right. Why don't we? If you're ready to do that, we'll pull the other one up. We can pull it up on our screens later.
Yeah, maybe you could, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen. Ours has a lot of internal comments. Might be better if you share the
That's
original
probably
version.
a good idea. Catherine, can you share?
Do you want the original version of your responses that you sent to us on installed measures? Is that what we're looking for?
Yeah, I think that would be fine.
Right.
Wait, have we circulated the responses on installed measures to the tag?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, they were. Okay, Joe, you need to unshare.
There we go.
Okay. Tag questions from opinion to opinion dynamics. Let me see if this is what we're looking for. The first question, this is a question from Emily. Okay, let's get that up anyway.
No, what I'm trying to say is that what we have circulated to Opinion Dynamics on the installed measures is a list of questions. I don't recall that we have seen written responses back from what you just briefly showed. It looks like you have prepared written responses, but I'm not sure those have been shared. We have seen your written responses on the fuel carbon intensity related questions, which are contained in 3 separate documents. And those were just circulated by Catherine last night. So I'm just wondering if it's for the installed measures, should something be circulated to the tag, or do we just want to talk through it verbally?
Well, if we haven't gotten it, and I thought we had, if we haven't gotten it, put it up on the screen. We need it on the screen, and it should obviously be circulated, but we can talk about it nevertheless. So let's.
Yeah, I don't think we're quite ready to circulate our responses, and sorry for the confusion on that, but we can address them verbally for sure.
All right. Well, then I will show you.
Yeah, yeah, Catherine, so you should open, if we're doing installed measures verbally, the question and comments for OD September 27th, not this one, the other. It's so this was on your original meeting invitation and it's like with the agenda and everything, and not on the latest update email, Catherine.
What's the name of the file?
TRM subgroup questions and comments for OD 9/26/24.
Yep.
Got it. We're going to share it.
How many people does it take to open the correct? See, I think this is indicative of just the volume of information we're all trying to keep track of. Yes, I think we finally got it. So it sounds like OD was prepared to verbally walk us through some initial feedback on these questions. Yes. And will you also be circulating written responses, Opinion Dynamics?
Yes, we will.
Our conversation today. Okay. Yeah, my suggestion would be that I just want to make sure we have plenty of time because I think the fuel issues are going to be a little more lengthy. So let's just be mindful of time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I can just launch into it if that's okay. Okay.
That'd be great. Thanks.
So the first question is around adding new measures. I guess we can talk to the PUC about this. Our general feeling is it's too late in the process, unfortunately. But I think we may be able we can definitely make modifications to existing measures. I know in this the first list of bullet points there was a commercial heat pump clothes dryer suggestion. So we could certainly look at adding that. That would be more like a modification to an existing characterization to add that specific baseline option. So we can certainly do that. I did want to clarify whether if there's interest to do that for the residential version of that measure as well.
I don't recall who raised that. I think it was Floyd, perhaps.
I raised the liquid biofuel fired conversion, but I think this was incomplete. It's conversion of existing furnaces or boilers, or installation of new 100% biodiesel or renewable diesel compatible furnaces or boilers. So it's both a retrofit or installed compatible equipment.
Yes, with specifically on that one, we feel that is largely addressed by the biofuels fuel characterizations. Kevin, do I have that correct?
Yeah, and I think I'm still a little bit confused on what the actual measure is because I think it sounds like this is maybe more of a cost issue than as opposed to a measure. Because if we're talking about converting of equipment, then there's a cost associated with that the fuels measures wouldn't be inclusive of explicitly. I think we have in the fuels measures, it would be the project cost. As for how the fuels measures characterize the savings, it's essentially looking at what the energy consumed is in the efficient scenario, and then it takes a conversion for what would be assumed the fuel consumption would be in the baseline scenario. So it's not necessarily a widget type measure. It's more about the fuels that are being displaced. So I think I need a little bit of clarity on what this measure would entail.
I mean, we're happy to provide additional clarity on that. I think I just wanted to make sure that that type of action where, you know, the obligated party, you know, provides for the installation of either a retrofit kit or brand new equipment that's compatible for 100% biomass-based diesel, that gets recognized in terms of credits under this measure. I mean, because that is an installation of physical equipment. So, I mean, that's my understanding of what an installed measure includes.
And so the way I read that is that it's installation of the equipment that enables a furnace to consume the alternative fuel as opposed to the fossil fuel.
Right. And then I'll defer to Matt if he has additional input on that.
Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, the idea is if we're installing a burner on an existing equipment that allows it to go to a B100 biodiesel, shouldn't that receive credits if that action is taken by a heating contractor?
I think that the way the fuel characterization, the fuel measures would look at that is if there is fuel that is then purchased and supplied to that end user, the customer, that there is a credit available, and the cost of the conversion of the equipment would be inclusive in that fuel measure. But in terms of like, if someone's just installing the equipment to convert the system, but there's no fuel purchase or no record of the fuel being purchased, there would be no savings associated. We don't have anything deemed to assume what the fuel consumption would be in a home or business.
Just a quick follow-up. The confusion, I think, is so we have contractors, and I represent that install burners that can accommodate higher levels of biodiesel. And then we also have contractors that install heating equipment that can accommodate the different types of biomass fuels. On that side of the ledger, you're counting the equipment that's installed, but not the fuel. But then on the liquid side, you're counting the fuel, but not the equipment. That's our confusion.
Yeah, and I think the fuels for the most part are characterized around like a drop-in replacement of the other fuel. So we're not assuming, I don't think there's any, I have to go back and look at the measures themselves and what they assume in terms of the equipment that's being converted. I think it's just wrapped up in the cost. But if the measure itself is the widget or the equipment that enables the consumption of the fuel, but there's no fuel that's being tracked, like then it would fall more into the widget side as we've been describing it versus the fuel side. And so I think there would have to be a characterization measure installed for that. I don't think we could just look at the conversion equipment or the piece of that has to go onto the burner to enable the fuel consumption as a standalone measure. I hope I'm being clear. I hope I'm not confusing things.
I understand that what you're saying is in the absence of evidence, for lack of a better word, that the biofuel is being consumed, the conversion itself produces no savings. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Matt, do you have any other questions on that? Right. Okay.
No, I understand the explanation. I hope for a different answer, but I understand what you're saying.
Okay, thanks.
And I can go into more detail on these other, our thoughts on these other suggestions. I know that time is of the essence. So I can move on to the next question. We can circulate our responses on the others.
I just wanted to make a quick note that on the additional measure of wood stoves replacing fossil fuels, I've been digging into that one a little bit further, and I think because of how you've separated out the fuel component from the equipment, installed measure component, I think we're covered there already. So we can talk about that more when we get further into the wood stoves, but I just wanted to observe that.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out, Emily. Yes, that was our intent why we did not include this as an installed measure, is because we felt that that scenario was covered by the fuel measure, the wood fuel measure characterization.
Yeah, so let's keep moving through the remainder of the questions then.
Okay. So the next question, TAG subgroup members had the following questions regarding installed measures in the TRM. Are wood stoves referring to advanced pellet stoves? They actually cover both pellet stoves and cordwood stoves. The measure characterization relies, it directs the user to use the EPA certified efficiencies for both of those types of stoves. With regard to the energy codes and standards statement, we certainly welcome any input on that would improve it or fix any flaws that are in it.
Okay. So request for input on that. Codes and standards.
Okay. So let me make sure I understand. So you are assuming that if there are, or have you assumed that any have you assumed any changes in the baseline over, for heat pumps? I guess is the question that the way this one comes up raises for me.
Well, the heat pumps are what we require for eligibility, and this is partially in alignment with existing TRMs in Vermont. For the full displacement measure, we require it to be a NEEP certified cold climate air source heat pump, because the NEEP certification, it does include a requirement for performance at cold temperatures, 5 degrees, I believe. So that type of equipment is more adept at actually providing full displacement of a fossil fuel furnace. For the partial displacement, we aligned with the heat pump characterizations in the Vermont TRMs, which require Energy Star level. So we're not including federal baselines in the heat pump characterization. We're assuming they're replacing fossil fuel equipment, or there's the option for a baseline fuel mix using average efficiencies of fossil fuel, electric, and wood heating equipment. So that's a long way of saying we didn't, basically the baseline for heat pumps specifically doesn't factor into the characterization as currently written.
Ryan?
Yeah, just going back to the first bullet on wood stoves, just I understand, well, I know that Ken Jones is working on a definition of what advanced wood heat could be as an installed measure. And I think that's where we're going to resolve, exactly what that means and what appliances are going to be eligible for that designation. And I've been doing some work on that as well. But I don't think we're going to resolve this elsewhere. And I just wanted to confirm that. Resolved outside of this meeting.
Right. We're still talking about that. You're right. Yes.
Okay.
Just want to understand what Opinion Dynamics has done.
So are we through the second bullet then with your comment, Rick? Anybody else have any other question? Ben?
Hey, everybody. I think this question gets at like the cycle as to how often the TRM will be updated, not so much there's anything wrong with the specific measure. So, from our role at EVT, we do rolling updates throughout the year, and then typically make those, if there was a federal standard change to a measure, we would apply it to the next program year, like January 1st, 2025. So I guess there's more of a question on the cycle for TRM updates and how OD or potentially another contractor would be actually doing these updates when there are standard updates, either the efficient or baseline conditions. So I think more of a question as to process on making those updates.
And yeah, and we can't speak to that, but we agree that that frequent, I shouldn't say frequent, but regular updates are needed to TRMs in general because codes and standards are always advancing. I think one issue to consider, and maybe this has been discussed in detail elsewhere, but is if heat pump is installed, say in 2025, and there's a codes and standards change in 2030, then for that particular heat pump, then do the savings in 2030 have to be adjusted to reflect the new baseline, or are the savings awarded in that year based on the measure as it was characterized when it was installed? So we can't answer that, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Yeah, thanks. I'll venture on that one. It seems to me it's the measure characterized as when it was installed that matters in that instance. But that's certainly a question that would be addressed, should be addressed, in the TRM or certainly amongst the TAG and the PUC at some point. But yeah.
The next one about alignment with heat pump savings with EVT TRM. In general, I guess we were directed to put forward the best characterizations that, within our view of the clean heat measures, and not necessarily match everything exactly in the existing Vermont TRMs. So there are some differences in some cases, and I guess we can't speak to how those will be reconciled, unfortunately.
Ben?
So yeah, EVT provided some comments here. I think it was Emily Rauska provided these forwarding from our just previous discussions. But yeah, this is an interesting one given I don't disagree with Opinion Dynamics' decision to increase equivalent full load hours for heating for these measures. It's really that we've been married to the decision back in 2017 when the previous Vermont heat pump evaluation was completed to use the equivalent full load hours in that evaluation, where we had a third-party evaluator do some in situ metering with on-site as well as a small sample of whole home meter based analysis. So we had our savings cut significantly, both for the EVT and Tier 3 TRMs, but the Public Service Department has required us to use those equivalent full load hours from those reports. So this is a deviation from that. So to be I'm trying to think. It would award all of us more savings, and I'm not trying to say we should not be getting more savings from adopting these new equivalent full load hours, but it is a deviation from a decision made by the department, and the department regulates our TRM. So I want to note that this is a significant mismatch. I think the savings difference is between 30 to 50%, given just really the linear difference between those equivalent full load hours. So I just want to note this is a big change, and the heat pumps, as we know, are some big hitting measures across our portfolio. So this is a big disconnect, and I just like to note that. And if we want to align with what Opinion Dynamics has had, great. If we want to actually use the previous heat pump evaluation, that would align with what some decisions were made about 7 years ago. And I will note too that just as of yesterday, the second iteration of the Vermont heat pump evaluation did kick off formally with the department. So we're hoping by the end of next summer, we'll have both winter and summer metering completed, which would update the full load hours for both heating and cooling to inform future portfolio years savings.
Yes. Yeah, thanks, Ben, for adding more detailed information on that point. I think just highlighting that this is a good example of an inconsistency of different programs in the clean heat standard, and this would cause a huge asymmetry in the market. So I'm not sure if that's a discussion when we come back to existing programs in the clean heat standard with the tag, or when we might continue that discussion, but just support everything Ben said and flagging that this is an example of an asymmetry in the market.
Okay. I guess related to that, the question, are the assumptions, eligibility criteria, measure life and savings aligned with the EBT TRM? In general, I just want to say, I want to expand on my previous statement that we definitely used those measures, the Vermont measures, as a starting point when we were developing our characterizations. Of course, the clean heat measures don't always align, how they've been defined don't always align exactly with the existing EBT measures, which are more around energy efficiency. So there's some differences stemming from that very basic definitional issue. So we did defer quite heavily to the Vermont TRM's assumptions, but there were some changes and effective full load hours for heat pumps is one of them. And just so everyone's aware, we did provide a short spreadsheet that lists those deviations and a brief rationale for each one. Is the information required for tracking progress aligned with EBT and WAP programs? I think we approached this from the standpoint of, we don't know like who the eventual implementers will be and what their tracking capabilities will be. So we tried to build flexibility into each measure design to allow for different options for parameters for tracking. So they don't necessarily align, but I think certainly now with the draft TRM out now for review, we're certainly happy to accept any suggestions for how the tracking recommendations can align with these existing programs. The next one is there a heat pump option to replace a rooftop fossil fuel thermal appliance? Yes, that is available in both of the commercial heat pump, air source heat pump measures in the TRM. It's referred to as single package equipment, but that's basically your a rooftop unit that it's referring to. The custom measure, we envision that it will serve the same purpose as a custom measure does in the energy efficiency world. It's essentially kind of a catch-all for measures that haven't been characterized prescriptively, maybe because they're very unique or there's not enough data to support prescriptive TRM type characterization. So that's the intent for the custom measure. And the sub-bullet there, I'm not sure what they mean by mixed biofuels. I was wondering if that was actually referring to the mixed baseline fuel option throughout a lot of the measures, where we provide an option for assuming a mix of fossil fuels and electricity and wood. I don't know if anyone can clarify that.
Any tag number have a, oh yeah, good. Floyd, thank you.
Yeah, I think I brought that up. Just to illustrate by example, there are a number of pathways, fuel pathways in the California LCFS that rely on the same fuel being made by different facilities, and each one of those facilities have to be certified under their own bespoke sort of certified fuel pathway. I was just recommending that, that sort of scenario, or a scenario where you have a commingling of feedstocks that, are used to produce, a biofuel, for example, that Vermont try to avoid developing kind of bespoke pathways for every time that happens, because it becomes administratively extremely burdensome. I mean, we had 25 highly paid engineers and scientists working on each one of these pathways, and I think that's just impractical for Vermont. So my suggestion, I'm definitely not discouraging including those scenarios, because that is what the marketplace supports. but find a way to simplify the, how to implement, that sort of scenario.
Okay, thanks. Heat pump water heaters. Who determines whether a standard electricity water heater replaced by a heat pump water heater will be considered as a credible measure? A member identified inconsistency in the TRM approach. We could use clarification on this one. I'm not sure I understand the question, unfortunately.
Anybody recall on this one?
Yeah, I think the question has to do with whether electric only measures going from baseline electricity to higher efficiency electricity should be included. There are measures that also include fuel savings, in which a component of electricity associated greenhouse gas reductions is included, in the measure characterization, because you're also shifting to a more efficient electric option than whatever was in the baseline. But those are measures that also have fuel savings. And so this is probably a little bit more of a policy question on whether the clean heat standard should incent, say, people that have electric resistance heat and hot water to retrofit to heat pump water heaters. I think that's yeah, and so I assume the TRM is done currently is done based on an assumption that you're switching from a fuel. But anyway, I personally, I think this is more, that's what the issue was, and I think it's more of a policy question. But if you have any thoughts on how this is currently handled, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so and we avoided scenarios where you were replacing a less efficient electric baseline system with a more efficient electric baseline system. So that's why we didn't have, for the heat pump clothes dryers, we did not have a standard electric clothes dryer as a specific baseline option. That said, we did provide the scenarios for a mixed fuel baseline. Again, not knowing how the programs will be implemented or tracked, and that was discussed with the TAG following our early win deliverable. And our understanding was we should proceed with providing that as an option, but also providing options for specific retrofits where the fuel is known. So we've done that. And for most measures, we've provided both those options. But in general, like, electricity is only available as a baseline fuel as part of the fuel mix throughout our TRM.
But it is included in the fuel mix, like you haven't removed any electricity from the baseline mix.
It is, yeah. And that's because, I mean, efficiency, if this is like implemented like efficiency program like that, the easiest thing is to track the characteristics of the new equipment, the efficient equipment, and having to verify the old equipment adds more, I guess, administrative burden, if you will, to the program. So we could envision scenarios where, yeah, maybe the implementer doesn't know what the baseline equipment was if they're installing a heat pump. And this way, they're not required to collect and verify that information. It's just, you would assume a mix, and hopefully on average across all the measures installed across all the states, that the mix would be relatively accurate.
Okay, yeah, I think that's probably enough on this question, but thank you, that's helpful.
The next one is on average heating efficiency, baseline efficiency for commercial electric clothes dryers or elsewhere of 3.66 is too high. It appears to assume a present heat pump adoption of 100%. So this table is actually referring to the space heating efficiency. It's not referring to the clothes drying efficiency, just to be clear. And yes, that efficiency is quite high. It's sourced from the 2021 Vermont business market characterization study completed by Cadmus. And what they found was that electric resistance heating in the commercial sector was very minuscule. It was approximately 0%. And all of the system types for electric heating that they found were heat pumps. So that 3.66 represents an average heat pump efficiency. So that's just what the data showed. Certainly we can, if folks have comments on the appropriateness of using that study, we can certainly take another look at it. The next bullet is around building thermal shell measures. A baseline assumption of total air leakage or zero insulation is not appropriate. So just to be clear on the air sealing measure, total air leakage is not the baseline assumption. The measure is based on reductions in leakage. So it's not assuming that the baseline leakage is any particular value. On the insulation side, that is also kind of a deemed custom type measure where the primary inputs are the pre and post R values of the insulation that is installed. Zero insulation baseline value was provided in the decarbonization table as an example assumption. It's not making any statement about the average efficiency of the housing stock in Vermont. And certainly we can, if folks have a better suggestion for what a more representative starting insulation value would be, we can certainly include that in the table.
I just want to make sure I understand. You're saying that you don't characterize leakage, but you capture it in your assumption of the starting R value. Is that the correct?
No, leakage is separate from insulation.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the starting leakage could be any value. The savings are ultimately based on the reduction in the leakage before and after air sealing.
Okay. Thank you.
It's really a site specific input for that measure. And the insulation is similar. It's a site specific calculation where the pre and post R values are custom, unique to each site. Moving on, how are costs determined? So we did secondary research on this. We relied quite heavily on the Vermont TRM since it looked like a great deal of work has gone into those costs, and in many cases they reflect local markets, so that seemed like the best source of cost information. We also relied on other studies in some cases where there wasn't a value from the Vermont TRMs available. But I just want to be clear that costs are not really the focus of our work. Our focus is on the decarbonization impacts. So there is a lot less rigor applied to the costs. We used other sources for those, but we didn't apply a great deal of scrutiny to those. Will the actual cost of a measure be reported or be tracked based on TRM cost estimates? I think that's not really for us to decide. We've provided default estimates in the TRM, but yeah, answering that question is really outside our purview. And then lastly, on costs, we did not update them based on inflation.
Emily.
Can I make a suggestion? I just scanning through just we have a lot to cover still, and I'm looking at the next set of questions, and I see a lot of I think I see some repetition between the questions noted here and the ones in our other sets of questions that you have responded to. So I just was wondering whether it might make sense to kind of skip to those and then maybe circle back and see if there's anything we missed that we wanted to make sure to discuss today, as opposed to going through all of these questions individually on the delivered fuels.
I don't actually understand what you're referring to. What other questions? I mean,
all of the responses on the Rick Weston memo from September 17th. I thought, I guess, are we also going through those, or are we just?
That was the intention. Where we overlap, we don't need to repeat ourselves. Are you suggesting that we identify those questions right now?
I guess I was just suggesting that we stop on this memo and shift over to the Rick Weston memo now, because I feel like that one is a little bit more comprehensive on these questions. And, you know, we have 3 other memos with written responses, and that Opinion Dynamics has already drafted responses to that have some repetition with these questions. So I just feel like it might be a little bit of a more organized discussion if we pause on this memo and shift over to the Rick Weston September 17th memo with Opinion Dynamics responses October 22nd in blue. October 2nd.
Fine. If others agree, that if others have no objection to that, that's fine.
In that case, I think, Kevin and Joe, do you want to share your screen now so that you show the actual responses?
Sure. I can pull up my screen. I have those open.
Thanks.
Just give me 1 second.
Yeah, and just for planning purposes, my suggestion would be that we start with the Rick Weston memo and then move to the ANR memo. And I think that the one that had 2 additional questions for me is really short. We might not need to pull that up separately, but we'll see.
So just to double check, this I believe is the Weston memo.
Yes.
Any chance you can make it a little bigger?
I absolutely think I can. Is that sufficient for others?
I didn't see much change. Yeah, if you can keep going, that would be great.
All right. I think that's as
there you go.
Wide as I can go before I'm not going to be able to see some of our responses. So the first question that we got was on the avoided methane emissions and whether or not those should be included. I'm not going to go through and read our response. I think where we landed on the last call, the last tag call that we participated in, was that this was something that might be brought up by the tag for consideration as to whether or not the counterfactuals would be included in the emission schedule or the carbon intensities. I don't know if that is the case or not. And so maybe I'll just leave it there and then we can have additional discussion.
The tag is certainly going to discuss whether counterfactuals need to be addressed. And we're actually creating some alternative texts that we will discuss at our next meeting on this. But you've answered the question here about what, where you went or what you didn't do with counterfactuals. So yeah, I think that's right.
See a hand up from Patrick.
Yep, Patrick.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, the response at the end said we're in the process of revising our analysis to determine the appropriate counterfactual scenario, and wanted to ask if you'll be able to engage with the tag in that process and let us know your thinking before you decide it, so we can give feedback, things like that.
Sure. I think that where we've been is trying to incorporate some of those counterfactuals into the analysis. We handed off the GREET workbook. The counterfactual work that we've done so far is not included in there. We didn't want to muddy anything that what we've delivered versus what we're doing. But we can certainly share our thinking as we're progressing. I don't know what the right forum or way to do that is. If we can work through Deirdre and the PUC to figure that out.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I'm sure we're going to have some side meetings on these things. I suspect we are. So yeah, talk to Deirdre and we'll coordinate.
And just a last quick thing there is I haven't seen, and I missed the last meeting, so maybe I missed it, but I haven't seen those GREET workbooks come through. Catherine, I don't know if you sent them, or I'd love to look at them, but I've missed them.
They just went out last night, and there's a link to the files in that memo that went out last night, email.
Okay, thank you.
You mean you haven't had a chance to look at them yet, Patrick?
No, I thought I'd downloaded everything from last night for the meeting today, but I'll look back at that right now. I might have just missed something when I was doing that earlier.
Yeah, it's a link in the email.
Right.
Got it. Thank you.
Emily?
Yeah, from my perspective, the TAG has not made a final recommendation on this issue. Rick, you're shaking your head at me, so.
Oh, I'm agreeing with you. We haven't made a recommendation.
You're going like, so it makes me think you disagree. So in my understanding is that Floyd and or maybe anyway, that issue is being written up to kind of share like the range of perspectives and pros and cons for the next meeting, and we have to probably revisit whether that timing is sufficient and whatnot. But I observe that leaves Opinion Dynamics in a tough spot where we have not provided clear direction on this. And so I think the thing to do in the interim is to provide it both ways, without the avoided methane, and then with, were you to include avoided methane, here's a reasonable set of assumptions for that, so that a little bit down the line we can make, the PUC can make a decision taking into account the TAG's final input on this point, and then have so I guess I'm just flagging there's like we're a little bit out of sync here, because you all need to present a final TRM and we still haven't made a recommendation on this. And our recommendation, I suspect, will not include full agreement from the TAG on this point. So yeah, anyway, just observing that to the extent you can show it both ways, I think that's probably the best we can do. Does that make sense?
To me, yeah, that does make sense. I think there's going to be a challenge there with the extensive amount of work that might have to go in to produce the counterfactual scenarios and the results in terms of getting a final deliverable, as well as like our budgets and things of that nature. So I think we'll have to talk internally about what we can do and provide. Maybe we can provide a little bit of insight to like where we're thinking, but I don't know if we'll be able to provide fully fleshed out values.
Thanks. Floyd.
Just to clarify, it wasn't me who was doing the write-up on the avoided methane issue. I think it was Sam or someone else.
Sam, and then I think I'm supposed to help him with that.
Yeah. Yes. And I'm writing up the direct versus indirect land use change.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't intend to assign everything to you.
Yeah, no worries. Got my plate full already. I did want to just add on the last point with respect to the GREET. I think my concern wasn't so much accessing the GREET model, but seeing what went into in terms of the inputs and the assumptions and the data. So that's where the suggestion to provide screenshots or listing of key inputs, that sort of thing. So my interest personally was just to kind of try to replicate and then do other scenarios with the GREET model. So basically I just wanted to see OD's work at kind of a little bit couple of layers down.
To respond to that quickly, yeah, we shared the GREET workbooks. It's a transparency issue. We want to make sure that you have what we have in terms of being able to replicate. And so screenshots and our assumptions are maybe would be sufficient for everyone's understanding. But, you know, from my perspective, I think sharing the workbook with the calculations and how we're deriving it, our assumptions, it gives everybody the chance to scrutinize them, to provide feedback. We're open ears to it. It's a very complicated, not just workbook, but project in general, just to try and deliver this. So we want as much feedback as we can get. And I wanted to take one step back, Emily, to your comment about the counterfactuals and maybe a little bit of confusion as to like what's written versus what we're planning to do. When we provided these responses, our assumption at that time was that counterfactuals were given, and so we were going to move forward and definitely do that. But given the conversations that we've had since that, it sounds like there is maybe still some uncertainty. So we're not able to maybe take that initial step to like go through, do all the counterfactual scenarios. We want to wait to see what happens out of the tag before we take those longer, more extensive steps. I hope that's clarifying.
Luce, you've been waiting a while.
Just a quick question. I can't get into that link, and maybe it's just me, but it asks for an email and then it says you're not allowed to log in. So
I just raised my hand for the same reason. So
yeah, I can't get in. So just letting you know.
Sure, we'll get that cleared up. We might have to reach out and ask for email addresses for everybody just to make sure that we get everyone access. I'm surprised it should be open, so anybody who has the link should be able to provide an email address and get access, but I will check with our tech team here to figure out, our IT team.
And I can provide you with the emails of the tag members after the meeting.
Yeah, thank you. Am I okay to continue on just for sake of time?
Yeah, please.
I think there was a question about this one about whether or not differentiated land. Will the counterfactuals be included in the final report? Will they be differentiated? If we were to include them, they would be embedded in the carbon intensities. We would not include them external to that or delineated for any kind of clarity. That way, the carbon intensity is inclusive of everything. You don't have to be concerned with whether or not to include counterfactuals or if they are or are not. So we're just trying to give a schedule of one value. Detailed workbooks have been provided. I guess I should note there are two. There's the GREET 1 and the GREET 2 model. The GREET 2 model is more for the infrastructure improvements. The GREET 1 model is the one that has the vast majority of our assumptions analysis. So the differences between NV5, so in certain instances, Opinion Dynamics assigns carbon intensities that differ from those provided by or used by NV5 in the potential study. And I think renewable diesel, biodiesel, biomethane, landfill gas differ in their negative values. So we've seen the NV5 results. We haven't had a chance, still have not had a chance to dig in deep into their analysis. So we can only speculate as to what that source of difference is. And I guess our understanding was that they were using the CARB values from the LCFS policy and the GREET models that are run out there. And so I believe those files include counterfactuals, which is why they would end up with some negative values, but they would not, I don't believe they include land use changes. So it could be any combination of that as to why there are differences between what we've provided or what NV5 has provided. Table 1 in our memo, and this memo, just for clarity, is referring to the emissions schedule analysis memo that we provided. In Table 1, it talks through what emissions, how we're accounting for emissions from upstream and from combustion. And so this question is asking why there are no nitrogen oxides for hydrogen combustion. And so what we did was we went back. It was a great question. We went back. We wanted to make sure that we understood what was being asked of us, and what we see from our lit review and from scanning different governmental resources is that there are NOx emissions, nitric acid, nitrogen. I can't remember what the other one is, NO2, not N2O. Those are precursors. so they are not included in greenhouse gas inventories. Only nitrous oxide is N2O, and so there are no N2O emissions associated with hydrogen combustion, but there are precursor emissions. So if the legislation ever changed where those were to be accounted for, then we would obviously have different intensities. They would not be global warming potential intensities, but those are usually associated with human health impacts. So they're outside of the scope of what we're doing. This question, recognizing upstream land use impacts from production. In general, we have tried to exclude land use changes impacts for the carbon intensities. That was a bit out of necessity because it is inconsistent in the GREET models where land use changes are and are not included. I think we give an example here for soybeans. There's an explicit input question or parameter that you can assign land use change impacts for soybean farming. That is not clear for corn or other feedstocks for biodiesel and renewable diesel. There are also just challenges that come along with including of land use changes, and the issue of additionality comes up. So this got discussed at the last TAG meeting as to whether or not land use changes from dedicated crops in the Midwest would even be appropriate or applicable due to federal legislation. So at this time, we still don't see a pathway forward on including those. Our intent is to not include land use changes at this time for this version of the CHS. Moving on, step downs for the carbon intensities. I think this has to deal with the, I keep calling it the EEL, but the emissions limit. I think this has to do with the emissions limit. Ultimately, we were using it as a reference point in our memo and in the analysis in our presentation as well. So it's not what we feel like was a recommendation. It was just using, I think, the bare minimum that was stated in the legislation, but it would ultimately be a policy conversation and a decision by the TAG as to what those limits are, or at least input from the TAG.
Yeah, we can move on. That's in fact on our agenda for later in this meeting.
Foodie or Opinion Dynamics assumes that biomethane and other feedstocks sourced outside the U.S. are not eligible. Why did we do that? We created pathways in the GREET model that are very specific, or at least we attempted to create very specific pathways. What we're trying to do then is ensure that there is consistency between the TRM and the fuels that are going to be used to get credits and what the TRM characterizes the carbon intensities. I think it would be very easy to look at if you were to import renewable diesel or biomethane or some other biofuel from outside of the US, then its fuel pathway might look very different than what is done in the US. There are international differences in laws and rules and regulations between countries and internationally. And so we didn't account for those. We didn't look at those. We've looked at where the majority of the feedstocks come from. So like, for instance, biofuels, 60% or more comes from the Midwest. And so we're trying to adhere to what we believe would be the most reasonable, generalizable carbon intensities for fuels coming into Vermont for use. Any questions on that before I move forward? Yeah. Similarly with biomethane, assuming that it's delivered through pipelines, we just weren't aware that there were other delivery methods for these fuels. I think we can go ahead and make revisions as to how that fuel is delivered, but we looked at biomethane as being a drop-in fuel for natural gas. And so our assumptions and characterization of the TRM was as such. renewable propane and why it was not characterized. I think we have laid out our decision on this. Essentially, GREET does not have a pathway. There is a pathway in CARB in California with the CARB and the LCFS policy. They use a tier 2 approach, which basically takes a simplified GREET calculator that I think was purposed for kerosene. They repurposed it for propane, and there are several that have been approved, but nothing that has gone through a more robust, comprehensive GREET model in California. And so we are hesitant to implement that. But if that's something that the TAG would like to see added to the TRM for this iteration, I think we had offered up a few pathways forward. And I think we have a note here that says that we had discussed this approach with the PUC and agreed that we will characterize renewable propane. Apologies for any kind of miscommunication there. So we will take the approach of trying to adopt something for Vermont. Biomethane being used to produce electricity. This one's a bit out of my wheelhouse. This is Zach Ross' response. So I'm going to read this one verbatim. Our understanding of Act 18 is that it defines the CHS as applicable to res, commercial, and industrial fuel use sector in the Vermont greenhouse gas inventory only. As we understand it, fuel used to produce electricity would be included in the electricity sector of the inventory, therefore not eligible for the CHS. We're less certain with respect to feedstocks, but we made the assumption that feedstocks would be captured under the industrial processes section of the inventory and similarly, therefore, would not be eligible. And then the question is, do any TAG members or PUC or do the PUC understand Act 18 otherwise? With respect to the inventory, would it be possible for ANR to share whether we have interpreted categorizations correctly?
Yeah, Patrick, you would raise this question.
Yeah, I think my question at the moment is more of a process one. Like, is the TAG going to discuss all of these responses? Are we discussing them as we go? With this one, honestly, I don't know the answer and was going to ask other members of the TAG. Are there people who understand this better than I do, and can explain it a little bit more? But if that question should wait till later in the meeting, that's totally fine.
Till later in the meeting or till another meeting, but yes.
Yeah.
We want to hear everything from OD today, and then I mean we've got so much on the docket today. But I'm happy at some point to chat about this issue. I think I understand it,
Sounds good.
And what they're saying makes sense to me. But let's have that conversation. We're going to need more time at another point. Thanks.
Thank
you. Yep. Thanks, folks. Keep going, Kevin. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. The question came in of whether or not there were any feedstocks that were not listed in legislation that should be included as a clean fuel measure. So we had shared our list back several months ago, and we only received a couple comments and suggestions. We addressed those. I don't think there's opportunity to make dramatic changes at this time in terms of what different feedstocks there would be. We can take on additional thoughts that the TAG might have, but we'll have to discuss next steps with the PUC. Was there, I guess the question I have is, were there specific feedstocks in mind, whoever had raised this question, or was it just more exploratory as to like whether or not the CHS is comprehensive or accounting for the majority of feedstocks?
I don't recall when this came up that there were specific feedstocks that folks had in mind, and I can be corrected on that, of course. I think it's more of the latter. Have we missed anything?
Understood. Okay, so renewable diesel, why only delivery through truck is it that considered eligible? So it's same as biomethane. This is the pathway that we had characterized. It's also what we understood to be the majority of the delivery for renewable diesel. If there are other delivery methods, we can take a look at that and include what this affects is not the upstream emissions or the combustion emissions. This only affects the adder for delivery from distribution, from the distributor to the end user. And so it's actually pretty minimal compared to the rest of the carbon intensity and where the savings or benefits are. So this would just be a simple addressing in the TRM with change of delivery method. But I don't know if the person who had asked this question or posed this question knows otherwise, or if the tag knows otherwise for how these fuels are typically delivered. Or other alternative.
Matt, I'm assuming, Matt.
Yeah, well, with respect to renewable diesel, and maybe Matt can chime in as well, renewable diesel can be delivered through pipeline as well as trucks. The current, predominant method may be by truck today, but there's nothing to prevent it from being delivered by pipeline. There's no transmix issues or anything like that. So just wanted to be sure that is accounted for or allowed to be included as a pathway if the market situation changes.
And that's a pipeline that would be typically running to industrial facilities. You're not talking about natural gas pipelines.
Not natural gas. No, this would be liquid petroleum diesel pipelines.
Okay. Yeah, if that's something that becomes more common in Vermont or is common in Vermont, and we've missed that, we can certainly include it. Right now, we'd only characterize for the truck delivery.
I'm not aware of diesel pipelines, but the department could tell us if there are any. And it seems to me, Floyd, let's assume there aren't, but there might be, that in the 3-year review process, that would be captured.
Yeah, it's the might be that I was mostly focused on. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so that moves us into the questions on wood. So why are only firewood production pathways in the Northeast eligible for this measure? In short, we were, for wood biofuels, we were leaning heavily on the work that was done by Eastern Research Group for the Agency of Natural Resources, ANR. And what they had done was characterized a 70-mile radius around the McNeil plant up is that in Burlington? Sorry, I'm not familiar with where it is, but they had basically made an assumption that there was a 70-mile radius around that for which firewood would be getting delivered or wood chips. And so those assumptions affected all of the pellet wood, transportation distances for pellet wood, firewood, and chips. And the idea being that in the Northeast, 70 miles, that reaches basically into New York, New Hampshire, and maybe it touches Maine, but we essentially wanted to follow along with that. So again, for consistency of the measure characterization versus what the carbon intensity includes, we're only looking at woods that would be harvested within that 70-mile radius, or basically Vermont and the Northeast is how we looked at it. Is there a different perspective? I think at one point someone had referenced whether or not wood being shipped in from elsewhere in the Pacific Northwest would be eligible. Is that still the case, or has that changed?
Any thoughts, tag members? Ken's not on the phone. I'm sure he would want to answer the question.
Sorry, what was the question?
I think on our last call, someone had referenced or broached the idea of wood coming from further away. I think they might have mentioned the Pacific Northwest. I could be mistaken. I don't want to mislead. But they had referenced whether or not that wood could be shipped in from outside of the Northeast. And it came up when we were discussing this before.
I think we're really careful about contaminating wood too in our own forests, right? So I'm not even sure that's a good idea.
Yeah, I know this came up in the context of, well, I guess just in terms of like a path forward, I think we can discuss this more, but personally, I would be comfortable with limiting the TRM defined measure to firewood production pathways in the Northeast. And then in the event that we realize or it occurs that we are bringing in wood sourced from other locations, then that would be a different TRM measure, I think, and could fall into like a TRM revision process down the road. I think one of the reasons is I might have brought this up in the past because I did want to make sure that we didn't have a wood measure that was characterized based on, friendly forest management in the Northeast that suddenly was so favorable. It was attracting like, clear cut forest products from the Southeast or different regions, and they were being treated the same way without accounting for those disparities in sourcing. But I think by defining the TRM measure in the way that you have, I think we can avoid that.
All right. Thanks, Emily. Patrick?
Yeah, I don't have a particularly technical take on this, but as a consumer who has a wood pellet boiler at home, a lot of the wood pellets that are available from distributors in Vermont in bulk come from outside the states, get trucked in from Alberta and places like that. And there is only one supplier in the state, to my knowledge, being Bournes, who can sell Vermont grown sustainable forestry wood pellets. So there's supply issues there, but also a lot of the pellets do come from most of the way across the continent. So.
Okay, thanks. Does that partly lead into the next sub-bullet?
So the next sub-bullet is speaking what we understood more specifically of the give me 1 second.
I think the answer to my question is no, that you would capture the Alberta wood pellets. Wouldn't that travel be captured in the life cycle analysis of that creates the CI?
Yeah, and so since we're looking at everything that's in the Northeast, I don't know if wood coming from outside would be included in that carbon intensity. And so like we would be limiting to that first question or first bullet. We would be limiting wood pellets, firewood, wood pellets, and wood chips, I believe, would be limited to the Northeast. And I'm just going to double check have the wood fuels up. Make sure that that is true for these as well. I'll have to take a look. It's going to be a little bit tough for me to read through the conditions. I think the second question or the second bullet is really asking about the delivery of wood fuels being equivalent to fuel oil and propane, if that's a reasonable assumption. So we're assuming that the travel distances from the distributor to the end user, not necessarily from the harvest to the production lumber mill or residue collection. Yeah. So just that last few miles, we assume that those miles are all fairly similar for all of the delivered fuels. And the adder emissions are really trying to account for the emissions associated with the truck and the fuel use that the truck is using to deliver those woods or those biofuels to the end user. And so the negligible comes from the fact that the adder itself is already a pretty small value in terms of the impact on the total measure. And then the difference between those deliveries are even smaller. And so we do feel like it's negligible. Adding that into those fuels, for those fuel characterizations, adds a level of complexity that doesn't net out a difference in emissions and savings or reductions. And so for simplicity's sake, for the TRM, we looked at delivery for those scenarios to be pretty equivalent.
Got it. Thanks.
Um, that's the end of those responses. Yeah. Do we want to, is there anything to recover there, or should we move on to either the
Let's move on. Let's move on to the A&R memo.
Why don't we take a 5-minute break? This is where we typically have our break before we keep going, and that'll give you a chance to bring up the additional answers or responses, and we'll pick it up from there. Is that okay? 5 minutes?
Right.
So 6 after, we'll start up again.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Jared's joining us. So if TAG members could turn on your video so we know you're back, and we'll get started again. I did not pause the recording, so we're still recording.
Deidre, I didn't see on the calendar these meetings coming up. Are they going to be added to the PUC calendar with links, like the workshop meeting? And
Yeah, they should be added to the PUC calendar. It might not have been done yet, but they should be added.
And there we have Kevin.
Sorry, didn't realize my screen was closed.
No problem. Didn't give you much time to catch your breath, but appreciate you if you can keep us going.
Sure, we're all set then?
Yes, why don't we just start, and I think as others join.
Okay. This is the A&R memo from the Forestry Service. And it starts off with, how does this schedule relate to advanced wood heating systems as statutorily defined eligible measures in Act 18? So the emission schedule is the carbon intensity for wood. The advanced wood heating systems are an energy efficiency upgrade improvement. And so those are in the measures themselves. They'll still use both the baseline and the efficient wood stove are going to use the same wood characterization for carbon intensity. Unless there was some reason a change in the wood type that's being used, like firewood gets replaced with pellets. But I don't know if we, and Joe, you could speak to this, I don't know if we include that in the efficiency, advanced wood stove efficiency or not. It's certainly not in the fuel measures.
Kevin, would you make
If
it
you
a
can
little
make
bit
this a
more?
little, oops, sorry,
a
little bigger, and maybe, yeah, get rid of the sidebar.
Thanks.
Yeah, sorry.
No.
What is the data source for the CO2 combustion emissions? To answer that, we use the US EPA emissions factor hub. These values should be in one of the deliverables for the schedule. I believe we have those assumptions in there and then linked to how they're being applied. They're only being applied to the combustion side, same with the GWP biofactor. That's also being applied only to the combustion emissions, since that is what it's relevant to. Table 1 does not provide this information, although memo text implies. And so if helpful, we can revise the memo text to clarify this point. If someone wants to let us know, the commenter has a question or a comment or wants us to do that, we can. Let me just scan. We do have one update on the GWP bio, and I want to make sure, and we can talk about that in this next question. So why are wood fuels treated differently than biofuels? In particular, landfill gas and animal waste biomethane, which is not produced from short rotation crops with respect to biogenic CO2 emissions. So a couple things. I think there are some updates that we can potentially make, and there are some wording choices that I think we made as well that have been led to a bit of confusion. So for wood fuels, we apply that factor, the GWP biofactor, to account for the temporal difference between how long it takes to sequester the carbon during the growth cycle versus how quickly it is emitted at combustion, which is instantaneous. And so I can go into the growing evidence or discussion in the scientific community as to the appropriate way to do this. Ultimately, we looked at what was in the life cycle, sorry, the Vermont Greenhouse Gas Inventory report, which suggested using a GWP bio to try to account for this. We read up and agreed that there should be something to apply because there is that temporal difference. So it gets treated differently than the other biofuels because of the length of the growth cycle of trees, of the forest, versus the growth cycle of some of these crops that are being used. And so I hope that answers why they're being treated differently. And then I do have one or two updates or one clarification. And I think it comes in later as well. So for wood, wood is being harvested for other purposes than for production of the biofuel. I think what we had been discussing was that these are like short rotation crops and that they are dedicated forests for energy use. And I don't think that that's technically correct to how they are characterized. Wood pellets and wood chips are collected from wood mill residues and wastes. That is in the TRM when we spell that out at the top sections of the wood fuel measures for the characterization. But I think that we've had some confusion on our part as to how we discuss those. The firewood is round wood. It is harvested for firewood. I do not believe that it is a byproduct as well, or similar to how pellets and wood chips are characterized. And then there's one update on the GWP bio factor. I think we had used, and it's in here somewhere, 0.32, which was derived from the World Wildlife Federation Foundation's GWP bio calculator. We had used, I have it written here, we had used spruce, cold climate or cool climate spruce and cool climate pine. Where we had made a mistake was using the spruce. That's not how we'd characterized it in the GREET model. You'll see that in what we had delivered over for those GREET models. We should have been using maple, beech, or birch. I don't remember which one is in the GWP calculator. When we do make that change, it bumps the GWP bio from 0.32 to 0.48. It is an update that we are going to make and apply to the carbon intensities for wood. So it's going to increase the carbon intensity of wood by that difference. And I don't have that rate, what that rate is. And so I want to pause there. I know that's a change from where we've been, and that's going to increase the emissions for wood. And so are there any questions on that?
We're not taking public comment at this point.
I guess I have a question. I just want to make sure I understand when we're discussing what on the wood issues. Because I have a lot of comments and I'm trying to figure out when to share them. My understanding is that we are discussing today, based on Ken's write-up, what installed measures should qualify as advanced wood heating. And then my understanding is that we are discussing at a future time, based on ANR's write-up, wood biomass emission factors and related issues, which is more related to this discussion. And I guess I wanted to confirm, when you think about wood biomass emission factors, there's two components of that. There's the combustion emission factors, and then there's the GWP bio factor that is then applied to the combustion emission. And based on reading your response, there were some helpful clarifications for me. I think you could clarify how you discussed this in the write-up you provided a little bit, just like what the GWP is being applied to and all of that. But I guess my question is whether ANR is going to be writing up options on both the combustion emission factors for woody biomass and the GWP bio assumptions, or just one or the other. And I guess that's a question for Brian.
Yeah, and I'm the forestry folks, Molly and Catherine, were awaiting this response from Opinion Dynamics. We haven't actually dug into the work yet, so I'm not prepared to say beyond what our assignment was regarding the emissions factor and the treatment of emissions and sequestration from wood biomass, exactly where we're going to go with that.
Okay. Yeah, I think there are a lot of assumptions that go into this. One specific note that I'll just offer at this time, related to the combustion emission factors, is that NESCOM has a lot of expertise on kind of assessing pollution from residential wood heating. And one of the things I've discovered in trying to bone up on this issue is that the EPA emission factors are extremely outdated. That AP42 is based on early 1990s technology. And NESCOM recently published a paper based on very recent testing data for wood and pellet stoves. It's scientifically reviewed, that includes updated emission factors for both carbon pollution and air pollutants for wood. So I should probably submit a comment to get that into the record, but I would propose that you use the emission factors from this NESCOM paper as opposed to this extremely outdated EPA research. EPA is currently funding NESCOM with like a gigantic grant to do a whole bunch of additional testing on wood systems to update all these extremely outdated test procedures and results. So we are currently assisting, like working directly for EPA to get all of these pieces updated. So there is a better resource than the EPA emission factors for combustion emissions that could be used here. So I'll try to, like, I guess, send that to the PUC, or maybe I can just send that to Deirdre in the meantime while I figure out how to submit a comment on this more broadly, but I just wanted to flag that specifically. That's setting aside the whole GWP bio issue, which has a whole other set of issues associated with it.
Any other tag thoughts here?
We did receive one other comment on wood as a byproduct, and so that's in the other set of questions that we received. So we're going to double back a little bit on this conversation, so there'll be an opportunity to add comments again.
Okay, great.
So I'd like to just skip this question in general. So there was a non-commercial firewood measure or fuel that was listed in the pathway that was listed in ANR's energy sector LCA. We misunderstood what that was. We were thinking that there were two pathways, one for wood for commercial, one pathway for wood for non-commercial or residential use. What we realize now is that that was actually like more of a feedstock as opposed to an end-use sector clarification or distinction. So we would recommend removing this. At this point, I think what we sent over in terms of the GREET model did have that removed. We had not seen any comment come back about not removing this, so we went ahead and took that step. If there's, I'll open up now if there's any disagreement with whether that should have been removed. Okay. So explain how the Vermont Energy Sector LCA framework was applied to GREET 1 2023. To generate the upstream emissions for wood chips, pellets, and commercial firewood. So we had received a copy of that from ERG and from ANR. What we did was we took it was for GREET 1 2022 model. We took the list of assumptions, table of assumptions, and the model itself, and went through each measure or each fuel pathway and confirmed that we either had the correct cell reference or changed the cell reference. We then reran the numbers for a few of the years that were included in the LCA from ANR and found good matching somewhere in the ballpark of 95% and up. What you'll see, there are a few comments in the GREET model that we sent over where we noted that there were some differences between what we had found and what was applied. One was on the nuclear side. There was a model update in GREET. So emissions associated with nuclear energy for the electric grid had a difference. And then I think we noted one other potential oversight on the ANR's part or on the LCA part in terms of transportation for wood fuels, which got included in for ours. So you can take a look at what we provided. You should be able to match in 2019 values in our model should be very similar to what was produced in the ESLCA model from 2022. So the rationale for using the 0.32, I think we've covered this. If there's no other additional question or comment on that, I think we can species that we had used. It's the spruce that should have been replaced with a birch or a maple for hardwood. That's what will change the number from 0.32 to 0.48. So the use of term lumberwood was just a mistake on our part. What we should have been referring to lumberwood, we should have been saying roundwood, and so it's logs. I think what we had used was lumberwood, not thinking about what lumber is, and so apologies for that confusion. I think we've tried to capture that in the TRM. We'll do a double check if it is still in there, or if there are any other questions or comments that the tag finds in the review of our files. Please feel free to make us aware of that. We will make sure to get that changed. So does firewood production pathway combine commercial and non-commercial? So we got rid of the non-commercial, so it's only commercial firewood. And the question about whether or not it's kiln dried. From what I've looked in and seen in the GREET model, it does not appear that there is any kiln drying energy intensity associated with wood production. That I think one of the evidence that we see is that there is moisture content included in the wood, and so that gets factored into its emissions. Do any of the production pathways include logging residues as part of the feedback? So yes, or feedback, sorry, feedstock, yes. Pellets are assumed to be produced from mill residues, shavings and sawdust. Chips are from waste chips from lumber mills. And so some of our deliverable materials, I think, had made misstatements about these production pathways. We can clarify those. Firewood is not assumed to be from a residue. It is from roundwood logging.
I think, Kevin, you've seen some comments. You may have seen comments filed with the PUC that there's, there are certainly people who feel that certainly wood chips are not necessarily only waste from lumber mills, but that in fact there are wood chipping activities in the forest lands themselves. So that may be that may be something you should take a look at.
Okay. Yeah, we'll take a look. Make a note of that. That's it for this memo comments. Again, we can take a quick pause if there's anything that we didn't, that I blew through, that anybody has any additional questions on. Otherwise, we can move on to what would be, I think, the last, no, sorry, we have Emily, we have your memo as well with a couple questions that we can tackle.
Please do.
Yeah, Kevin, thanks for doing this. I'm going to pass this along to the Forestry Division folks, and if we have any questions or clarifications or comments, we'll share them with you through the appropriate channels.
We appreciate it.
I'm just wondering, in the interest of time, I would be okay skipping my questions. I feel like the answers are pretty straightforward, and I think it might be better use of the tag's time to move on to some of the kind of policy discussions.
Well, we can skip that, but Kevin, you have one more thing you wanted to run through. Is that right?
Yeah, I think there was one question in what the September 24th. Let me stop sharing. Catherine, would you be able to bring up the installed measures comments? I think towards the end there was a biofuel question on wood in terms of, I'm just trying to find it on my screen as well.
Questions for the installed measures that we had up earlier?
Yep, and towards the end there was a question about delivered fuels for wood. Okay. And it's on if wood fuel is from a waste feedstock, then the upstream production emissions should not be included. And I could share my screen, but we have a lot of internal kind of comments here, and I prefer to not. I just want to quickly just speak to waste feedstocks and how we're handling those. And so we're still exploring the issue of how to handle byproducts turned into fuels. Our approach has been to try and treat byproducts as sharing the burden of the emissions with the primary product. So like for wood, I think one example would be like wood is being harvested to be turned into furniture. and the wood chips and the byproducts of that furniture are wood chips, which can be turned into wood chips or pellets. And where does the wood chip begin in terms of the emissions accounting, and where does the furniture end, or the main primary product? And so our approach was just to basically share those emissions on the upstream side with the finished product and with the fuel itself. If the tag believes otherwise, or if there is a Vermont policy that exists that provides guidance as to how to account for byproduct production, then we can go back and adjust this from the upstream accounting accordingly. But again, our approach here was that we think that those emissions are being shared between those. Once something has value, it doesn't make sense for it to no longer, or for it to continue to have no emissions associated with it, because it is a product. It is not just a byproduct. And I think there's only one other point to be made on this. Well, it's actually on something else. I'm sorry to jump around. I'll stop there. I have one other comment to make on the questions that we received. Just want to make it sure that opportunity here for others to comment on what I just said about byproducts.
Any thoughts from members of the TAG?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So again, that's not, or you tell me, is that the same methodology that you're using for other, quote unquote, waste-based fuels then? Like, is manure now like no longer a waste? It's a byproduct that makes biomethane?
Yeah, I believe that the accounting that we've been applying in the GREET model is to share those loads, those emissions.
Okay.
And that actually leads into the other comment. So in our trying to address the comments for the different liquids and biofuels, one came up about, we've had this question a couple times, why is corn as a biofuel lower in carbon intensity than other fuels? And in particular, this comment was about used cooking oil. I want to just make sure that this comes, that we make this clear. What we found was a couple things, 3 points on that. And one, there's differences in yield rates in terms of like the energy that comes out of a pound of the feedstock between used cooking oil and corn oil in particular. There's also a difference in the used cooking oil in terms of energy intensive methods. So there's like a collection of the feedstock, they have to render it. There's transesterification, and then eventually transport. So there's additional steps with used cooking oil. It's not just simply taken from, collected and then put into a finished product. There is some energy intensive. But the piece that I really want to talk to is that while we were trying to address that question, what we learned is that farming impacts were excluded for the corn and the carbon intensity for corn. There is a parameter, a button, a value that you can enter into the GREET model that says that how are you going to allocate the emissions upstream for byproducts. So this is why I want to bring this up. What we had done was an oversight on our part was left it that the ethanol production received all of the burden of the corn farming, and that the corn farming emissions were not associated at all with the corn oil that gets used for the biofuel. We'd like to make that change to be consistent throughout all of our products. What that does is it brings corn-based biodiesel and corn-based renewable diesel slightly above soybean and canola-based biodiesel and renewable diesels, I believe, because of the farming intensity that's associated with corn. That's a change. We can provide that in a memo with a write-up explaining it. But again, I just want to make sure for transparency purposes, what we've seen as we've gone through trying to address these, given the complexity of the model.
That'd be great if you could give us a brief written piece on that. That'd be very helpful.
Sure.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from TAG members? So, Kevin, that gets everything you wanted to talk about with us today?
Thank you.
Great. You can stay on if you want to listen to what we're next going to get to, but Sorry, we've got a few more minutes and we can overrun a little bit here. Thank you. Thank you, Opinion Dynamics. Really appreciate all the effort and the feedback. Catherine, we've allocated time in this session to hear from the individuals who've been given assignments from our subgroup on matters that we want the TAG to take up and essentially vote on. Okay, and we've asked for text that will lay out the issues and the choices. We've got some of that text that was sent around to the group earlier this week. We've got some text already provided, and we're expecting more at our next meeting. And we will also be hearing from Jared as well, Jared Ulmer, on public health benefits. And Jared, if you're on and you want to say anything about that today, we'll give you some time for that. I'm thinking that what we ought to do here is hear briefly from the folks who have already submitted some text for a brief description of what they've done and what they've provided, but not spend really any significant time discussing the substantive elements of it. We're going to come back to that, but it's to get people understanding where we're headed with this. We're identifying issues that the TAG that we feel that the TAG needs to take a position on or not. We need to, I mean, the more, for lack of a better word, the more controversial issues, okay? We tried to identify all those or many of them in our subgroup meeting last week. I think that in order to really make our work efficient, if there are issues that TAG members feel that the TAG needs to take a position on or needs to at least address in some form or another that we haven't identified, we're going to need to hear from TAG members on that and prepare those issues for discussion and a vote at either the next meeting or the meeting after that. And I'm thinking as a consequence, and I'm just spitballing here for the moment, that we're going to need some time with an ad hoc group next week to organize our thoughts on these. That's just a thought at this point. Catherine, I'll turn it to you to then turn it to the various folks who have who can speak to us on these issues. Is there something we have Ben as well that we want to hear from?
Right. So one clarification, we're not asking for a vote today. We're raising the issues and would it be appropriate to at least allow enough time so people can ask clarifying questions?
Oh, yes. Yes.
And give some feedback on these issues so that if we are going to make changes or, just input
sure.
from the authors on how people are feeling about it. So I wasn't sure how to interpret we're not going to discuss them. So it seems.
Well, I'm thinking I'm trying to be efficient given the amount of time we have. That was all. No, I wouldn't. No, of course we wouldn't constrain clarifying questions. But I'm thinking that a major discussion on the substantive matters at hand at this point would not. We just don't have the time for it.
Yeah, well, I think the first couple we can probably get through very quickly because they've already been covered. Opinion Dynamics has already touched on the first couple of them.
Sorry, can I just ask a question? So are you saying, Rick, we don't have time today and we will be substantively discussing these at our next meeting? Or are you saying
that's what I've said, yes, but do you
okay, because I wish I would have known that because I scrambled to prepare all my input on some of these topics for today's meeting.
And I would suggest, given that we have a whole bunch of other issues to take up anew next time, that to the extent that we can get any kind of clarification and understanding, yes, and maybe positions from the TAG members today on these four, it would be great.
Well, okay, but we're not taking a vote, so that's...
No, we're not taking a vote, but we need to at least be ready to take a vote next time. So
Yes, Emily, we're not saying we're not going to discuss them. I just don't see, a 20-minute discussion on each of these being possible at this moment. That's really what I'm trying to avoid. It's just a matter of efficiency. But yeah, clarifying questions and discussion, absolutely, But yeah, okay. So I'll turn it
the
to you,
first, the
Kathleen.
first issue was going to be just, as I said, something that Opinion Dynamics has already touched on, which was regarding kind of the alignment between the Efficiency Vermont TRM on questions of measure life and eligibility criteria. And I understood that Ben Platzker was going to at least address those verbally. And we've already heard from Opinion Dynamics that there are places where they are not completely aligned, and that was somewhat intentional. So Ben, if I'm not putting you on the spot, I understood that you're gonna, yes, Joe, you want to clarify that?
No, I'm fine. Sorry, I misclicked.
Okay. And Emily and Ben, how do you want to handle this?
Ben, do you have any additional thoughts on anything you want to share related to inconsistencies or consistencies between the TRMs?
I appreciate Opinion Dynamics putting together that spreadsheet. It was immensely helpful to kind of call out where those disconnects were. We don't really have any other issues or concerns outside of the equivalent full load hour impacts that I'd summarized before, which is really to say that I don't disagree with what Opinion Dynamics has done. I think we need both Efficiency Vermont, and I think as well for the Tier 3 TRM and the Clean Heat Standard TRM is we need to have the same assumptions on those hours. These are the same measures being installed in the same places, and we should all be being awarded the same amount of credits. So getting clarification from our regulator and likely the PUC as well as like we need parity here. And if in fact we want to leverage what Opinion Dynamics has done, great. But as we have been required to over the past 7 or 8 years at Efficiency Vermont, we have to use this Vermont heat pump evaluation outcomes to inform our savings. So if there's a decision made by the state to deviate from that, great. Or if we are going to stand by the heat pump evaluation findings, my request is that the Clean Heat Standard TRM aligns with that. I don't think we should have the same measure being installed in the same locations in Vermont being awarded different savings depending on what TRM is being used. That doesn't make any technical or reasonable sense from my experience.
When you said the state, and you referred to this earlier, you were talking about the Department of Public Service. Are they the decision maker on this question, or is that ultimately a PUC question?
Good question, Rick. So for the EEU TRM and the Tier 3 TRM, the department is the kind of final approver of those assumptions. So for the EEU TRM, we have a similar contractor such as Opinion Dynamics that does a third-party review of our assumptions. And it's the department that has the final approval as to what our assumptions are used. So it's the department making those decisions for those both Tier 3 EEU, but it's a little bit different in this space, right? We have the PUC making those decisions. So for clarity purposes, yes, it's the department has chosen to do that. And of course, if I'm happy to have a discussion with those in the department offline about this, but it's definitely of concern if there are different savings values being attributed to the same measure installations.
Well, I certainly encourage that discussion. And Alec, if you have anything you want to add at this point, that'd be helpful.
I'm not sure if we still have Alec.
Oh, there he is.
Popped up.
You're muted if you want to speak, Alec. You may have two mute buttons. Well, that's fine. I think we got the message, and we'll need to resolve that in one way or another. It seems to me, though, at least there's some time in which to do that.
Sure. Yep.
Well, and I'm wondering, is it appropriate to ask Efficiency Vermont to submit specific language that they would want the tag to consider endorsing on this issue?
I can work with Ben. I think that just off the top of my head, language might be just a flag for the commission moving forward. I know the check back report is January 15th, so that might just be something that's flagged for legislators and the commission when looking at consistencies across Vermont. Does that sound good, Ben? We can follow up with the tag via email if we come up with that language.
In that case, then Emily, the next topic was just your short list of bulleted items that went to the question of data and criteria used for tracking progress. And so I wondered if you wanted to share that and say more about it.
Yeah, that was just for the tags awareness. I know Ken had asked for just to make sure that what's being asked in the data tracking recommendations and the TRM aligned with what I think Efficiency Vermont upstream programs are asking for information. I think based on that list, there's no inconsistencies. So that list was just, I think there's nothing to vote on for this. I think just for awareness, aligning what might be recommended for data tracking purposes in the Clean Heat Standard TRM and versus what's being collected. So.
Great. And then the next issue, we don't have Ken with us today, but Ken did draft an issue on this question of how to define clean wood.
Advanced wood heat.
Advanced wood heat, that's it, sorry. And you're going to do that on his behalf, Rick?
Well, let's pull it up. Emily also helped with that. Let's pull it up so people can see it.
Yeah, I've actually been spending a fair amount of time prepping for this discussion, so I could possibly talk the group through it if that would be helpful.
Please do, Emily.
But if somebody else could bring it up, that would be great.
I am doing that now.
Yeah, so I just want to make it clear because it's taken as someone that did not arrive to the tag with an enormous expertise in wood carbon accounting issues. I just want to make it clear that this discussion is setting aside all the previous questions and discussion we've had around carbon intensity of fuels. This is just around how we define advanced wood heat for an installed measure. So the TRM assumptions for this would be sort of paired with the fuel carbon intensity assumptions and the GWP bio assumptions to come up with the final answer. So this is just like a piece of the wood conversation that has to do with the question we're trying to answer here is which types of wood and pellet heating systems should be eligible as clean heat measures for installed systems. So if you're like installing a new wood or pellet system, what kinds of systems should be eligible? And then for those systems, Opinion Dynamics has developed some TRMs already, but they developed TRMs, I think, for both, like they included wood and pellet stoves, as well as pellet sort of whole home heating systems. So there are TRMs for maybe all of these options already developed, but we never really fully answered the question or took up as a tag the question of should all of these types of heating systems be eligible. So the options as Ken has laid them out, option one, I think the first two options are really the main ones. Option one would be to restrict eligibility as a clean heat measure to fully automated central heating systems, which I think would be pellet systems. So these are like whole building heating systems. That's option one. That would be the most restrictive. Option two would be, if you scroll down a little bit, to basically just cast a much wider net and include like all kinds of other systems. So pellet, we can talk about if it should be all of these or just a subset of these, but pellet stoves, cordwood stoves, pellet and chip boilers and furnaces, and if so, is there some like criteria? Should just it be a free for all, like any and all of these should be eligible, or should there be some efficiency and emissions criteria. There are some proposed in the TRM. I have personal thoughts that I'll hold for a moment on, whether those are sufficient or not. But, that's basically the question. Ken also has identified a third option. If you scroll down to the bottom, where, I guess he's setting aside like the actual installed heating system, that maybe just like delivering wood fuel alone could be eligible just for the fuel. I don't know what to do with this one. I'm not quite sure how to tackle that. I think for today, if we, kind of getting the TAG's thoughts or clarifying questions to inform a recommendation or set of options around one or two, I think would be most helpful. Rick, what would you add to that?
Well, well, nothing except that I agree that option 3 is not an installed measure. And I think it sort of, it isn't, yeah, I agree on that point. But Ken wanted to raise it just as a possibility, I guess. No, I think we have some choices here about how to define what what would be the minimum standard for something that we would call advanced wood heat. And it really will be a for the TAG to say yay or nay to 1 or 2, I think, at this point, unless folks have other thoughts about this that we're missing here.
So let's open it up to TAG members. Yeah, Jared, and then Brian.
Thank you. And I'm still a little confused about how much we're getting into discussion of these right now, but I just wanted to just flag that this is definitely a topic of public health interest, and I'll bring more into the public health analysis that I'll be preparing for the next meeting. But just, want to state from the public health perspective, unfortunately, any form of residential wood heating tends to have more public health impact than pretty much any other conventional source of heating. And there's a big spectrum from like the advanced automated, like whole house wood boiler system is maybe only marginally worse in terms of pollutant emissions versus cordwood stoves that are, substantially worse, and unfortunately even with EPA certified wood stoves. So I do want to state that as much as public health comes into the conversation here, and I realize that's only one consideration, that this is going to be a topic that has pretty important public health ramifications.
Well, Jared, let me just ask, for the purposes of defining advanced wood heat, give some thought to how public health concerns should be reflected or not. I mean, because of this could be, strictly on public health concerns. One could imagine, and I'm not saying yay or nay at all either way on this, one could imagine that perhaps all wood heat measures should be disallowed as clean heat measures. Okay, if the PUC could reach that conclusion, that the public health impacts of wood heat are such that they should not be given incentives under a clean heat program. I mean, that's essentially the question that the TAG and the PUC are ultimately being asked to answer. But for simply defining what is advanced wood heat, the question of how the public health impacts lays into that, something that I'm asking you to give some thought to.
Yeah, and I'll bring more information back on that. And I think the definition is really critical here, because option 1 would arguably have substantially less public health impact than options 2 or 3. I think no matter which option is chosen, there's no way around there being negative, potentially negative health impacts, unless this is all replacing like uncertified, older wood stoves. Like if you're going from a worse polluting wood stove to something newer, then yes, there's a benefit there. but for any like fossil fuel to wood replacement, there's going to be a net negative health impact. So I think it really gets into a matter of degree between these three options, and I can bring more information back on that.
Right, Brian.
Yeah, I'll start with the last thing that Jared said. If you're replacing a current wood system with a new wood system, in the inventory methodology, you wouldn't earn any credits anyway. There wouldn't be any change in emissions in the RCI sector from that change. Or I guess you could potentially earn credits, but if you were burning less wood from a life cycle standpoint, but you wouldn't reduce emissions anymore. So that's kind of like is relates to that whole, how do you do that conversion? For option one, I mean, it's true that the Clean Energy Development Fund and Efficiency Vermont have provided incentives for these automated systems, but they also provide incentives for all kinds of stuff. We know certified wood stoves. When we have the list, the Air Quality Division has a list of what EPA certified stoves are allowed to be sold in Vermont. I was not following the conversation in the legislature when they inserted the advanced, wood heat as a installed measure. But I would like to believe that they understood what that meant when they did that. But I can say I'm not entirely sure what it means. And then regarding, option two, I think like a broader definition, could be appropriate, but tying it to a federal tax credit that might change over time and not be something that's, Vermont specific. I don't know that that's the criteria that we would want to use there.
Thanks. Liz.
Hi, I'm looking at these options, and they did include advanced wood heat, obviously, in the statute. And I'm a sample size of 1, but we have a propane boiler. We had a cord wood stove, and we've replaced it with a very efficient pellet stove. And I would think there would be some advantage there of reducing the use of propane versus and using wood pellets. And also, again, this is sample size of our family. The creosote in your wood stove, when you use pellets, the wood stove pipe is night and day. It is so clean, it's incredible. And that's it's not scientific. I'm just saying you can see it's a clean burning fuel. So I would vote for option 2 with an efficiency limit like Ken here has, but with an efficiency limit so that you are getting a current pellet stove or a current, cordwood, or maybe we remove the cordwood because I know it's not as clean as pellet boilers and pellet stoves, but I do feel there's a place for these to replace fossil fuels.
Thanks. Emily?
Yeah, I'm now shifting from framing the issue to providing my personal perspective as a TAG member. And my employer is NESCOM, which is an air quality organization working with air agencies across the Northeast. So I've been digging into this a lot with my colleagues who are very expert in these issues. So a couple things. One, I did actually do a little bit of digging on the question that Brian raised about maybe it was just loose. I'm sorry, I'm losing my mind. What the legislature intended, and the input I got on that was that it wasn't clear, shockingly, that legislators seem to have different things in mind. It wasn't like they clearly intended only to include central systems. There was some discussion of stoves. So I think that was a little bit across the map, and that hence punted to us. So that's just on that point. So I was just reviewing the measure characterization in the draft TRM. There's a measure for the for the central pellet systems, and then there is also a measure characterization for pellet and cordwood stoves. it's supposed to, and then there are eligibility criteria based on efficiency greater than 70% and particulate matter, fine particulate matter of less than 2 grams per hour. So I guess, so my NESCOM's view on this, my view on this is that there need to be clear equipment for, criteria for both equipment efficiency and emissions. So not just efficiency, but emissions has to be in here because of the issues that Jared said. Rick and I were chatting about this, and so efficiency, that's fine. We can set a limit of 70% or 75% or whatever that we can measure. Emissions criteria is harder because the EPA certification program is broken, and there is an EPA Inspector General report to that effect, and NESCOM has a huge project currently to help EPA fix this program. But the bottom line, I'm just looking at my note, is that state regulators and the public cannot, and this is, I think, a direct quote from the Inspector General report, state regulators and the public cannot rely on EPA's wood heater program to ensure that only compliant appliances reach homes. And EPA and states may be wasting millions of dollars on change-out programs by subsidizing new appliances that may not be substantially cleaner in real-world conditions. So the problem is that there actually isn't like an emissions standard that is functional right now for cordwood stoves. So then I was digging into this a little bit more. That applies to both the pellet and the cordwood, but apparently NESCOM testing has indicated that the EPA certification is kind of fine for pellet stoves. Like, you can buy an EPA certified pellet stove and the emissions are reasonable and what they expect. That is not the case for cordwood stoves. That whole certification is broken, and EPA is under a consent decree to promulgate new regulations by 2028, but they have 5 years to comply, and there's like a whole new test procedure, blah, blah, blah. So this is going to take a while to be fixed. So I personally, although I would prefer option 1 to only allow the central systems and just, delete option 2 completely, if we absolutely must include stoves, I do think they should be limited just to the pellet stoves and to EPA certified pellet stoves, because we do not have a independent emissions criteria that is usable right now that will ensure reasonable emissions from cordwood stoves. I don't know if I said all that clearly, but
no, that's you got it. And Luce was herself alluding to this issue. As a general matter, I would say that I'm a believer in performance standards. Okay, and I wouldn't, and if any technology can meet the performance standards, efficiency and particulate matter output and so on, it doesn't matter whether it's pellets that go into it or cordwood. You're making an argument that that there's no way to be confident about cordwood stoves at this point, and there's reason, therefore, to not include them in the definition, and that's fine. I could certainly see a way of writing this that says, unless and until the technology is sort of, it can be certified and confidence in it, in its ability to meet the standards works. So yeah, again, option 2 would work if the standards are satisfactory, it seems to me. Jared.
I was just going to add one related comment. I think if I'm understanding, Emily's explanation and the research behind it properly, I think a lot of the issue comes down to automation and, whether you're using something manufactured for the specific purpose of automatically, combusting it in a piece of equipment versus all of the variation involved in the wood that you're using, how you're storing it, its moisture content, how hot you're burning your stove. Like, there's so many human factors involved with manually operating a wood stove. So I do think, maybe the criteria of automation should come into play here as a, potential line between what counts as advanced or not, because I do think, and again, Emily or others, I invite you to correct me if I'm off base here, but I think the functionality of automation is what really makes the pellet stove emissions factors more reliable than the cordwood ones, which unfortunately most of us don't run them like they should in the lab.
Got it. I would say, I would say that we should move on to other topics and come back to this, starting very possibly in an ad hoc meeting next week, but also for further discussion in our next meeting. And in the meantime, Emily and others, those folks who have thoughts on this, should confer and think about how we might want to amend this definition, these options as appropriate, so that we can capture some of these thoughts. Does that work, Emily?
So the last topic was, Emily, your memo on the step down schedule for biofuels. Stop sharing. Do you want me to pick that up, or do you want to just speak to it?
If you could pull it up, that would be great. This is just the issue of, so what I wrote up included the relevant sections of the statute for reference, but it's this provision that in order to be eligible as a clean heat measure, a liquid or gaseous clean heat measure, so this doesn't include solid fuels, just liquid and gaseous fuels, shall have a carbon intensity value as follows: below 80 in 2025, below 60 in 2030, below 20 in 2050. So that raises a question of whether it's like a step down, where it just has to be below 60, like all the way through 2049, and then suddenly it jumps down to 20 in 2050, or whether it should decline either linearly or possibly in some other pacing, but have some sort of annual decline in carbon intensity threshold values in that 2030 to 2050 period. I made this little kind of illustration table here just so folks could see what that would look like. I want to note that based on prior TAG feedback on the PUC pacings proposal, we had supported just having the threshold be 80 through 2030, like through 2029, excuse me, until that it jumps down to 60, just for ease and simplicity in the starting years of the clean heat standard. So we have already expressed support for that, and therefore I was considering that piece of it resolved. So that's why they're the same. They stay at 80 for 2025 through 2029. And then they both drop down to 60 in 2030. And that's where the trajectories differ, where the linear decline, what's showing here is kind of a steady linear annual decline. So the threshold is, in 2040, it's down to 40. And in 2050, it's down to 20. And versus the step down option where the threshold remains 60 all the way through 2049 before jumping way down to 20 in 2050. So that's basically the question for the TAG to consider. We have not taken a position on this. The PUC proposal left this open-ended and said they could sort of resolve this later and figure out the trajectory post 2030 later. We said, that's fine, we can take this up later. So we haven't taken a position on what happens in the 2030 through 50 period with carbon intensity thresholds. I would also note it doesn't.
100. I hope 0.
Oh, somebody is not
I muted.
It doesn't have to be a linear decline. It could decline faster than shown or slower than shown or on some other pace. I didn't happen to include an option for that. If you scroll to the bottom, Catherine, where there's a little bit further discussion, I just wanted to wrap up by noting kind of the impact. No, not this one, at the bottom full document. the discussion part. Yeah, this one. So just in terms of discussion, option one is arguably more consistent with legislative intent, since the legislation does include language around the commission publishing the rate at which carbon intensity values shall decrease annually. I did bold that, but that is words in the statute. So it's unclear to me whether the step down would be consistent with an annual decrease as required by the statute. Option two might be somewhat less complicated to manage. Like, I could see it being kind of complicated to have this threshold carbon intensity value declining, ever changing every single year. In terms of the impact of this, it's not necessarily a huge impact. Some of this is subject to change because Opinion Dynamics is still in the process of revising and finalizing carbon intensity values for various liquid and gaseous fuels. But based on the draft results, and I referenced the CLF comments just because they actually like had attachments that sort of showed this in very clearly. So if folks wanted to refer to that, but using the linear annual decline method, there are 4 fuels, actually 6, because it's both soy and canola for renewable diesel and biodiesel, that become ineligible before, or excuse me, I guess 5 fuels that become ineligible before 2050 if you use that method. Whereas if you do that step down in 2050, all of those fuels are eligible until they're suddenly ineligible in 2050. So there are some fuels that kind of like drop out of eligibility in that period of time if you do a linear annual decline. And again, that's based on draft data, so subject to change. This did come up somewhat in the discussions of the pacing subgroup, which I served on, where PSD representatives also flagged a risk that you could, like, if you have the CI step down, if you go with option 2, that could sort of lag the emission reduction requirement. Like, you're still allowing all these fuels with relatively high carbon intensities that are contributing, fairly minimally to actually achieving emission reduction for a long time. And so you could sort of fall behind and get, emissions reductions that aren't really keeping pace with the RCI sector reduction requirements. So that's a potential concern as well. So that's the issue and some options. And like I said, there is a possible third option of like decline on some other pace. I don't know what that would be or what the basis to decide that would be, but we could discuss that as well.
Well, one could certainly imagine a series of step downs, a step function, which may make sense given expectations for changes in technology. My experience with this has been in emissions requirements for backup generation, small scale generation. And you're really talking about what at some point you talk about what manufacturers can expect over some period of, what they expect will be improvements in their efficiency and of the technologies, and when they think manufacturing will hit those targets or those expectations. So you could do, I don't read the language of shall decrease annually as a requirement that they shall, but it does say shall, so it's an interesting question. Floyd.
Yeah, thanks. And I want to thank Emily for putting this together. It really helps with clarifying the issues. I had a couple of responses. With respect to that language, publish the rate at which carbon intensity values shall decrease annually. I would submit that the 2 step down schedule, as we are currently, looking at, fits that definition, or it fits that language as well. I mean, I agree with you, Rick. There's nothing in that language that specifies, a particular form of annual decrease, and the step down, the 2-step schedule as it stands right now, I think fits that just as well as anything else. I do want to go back to kind of administrative efficiency, because the program that's under development right now is getting increasingly complex, and I'm concerned this is going to be impractical to implement. And when you add the additional complexity of an annual decrease, linear or otherwise, I think it makes it, exponentially more difficult for a state like Vermont to implement, because now you're having, on an annual basis, you're having to reevaluate everyone's compliance on the basis of a standard that is different from the year before and is different from the year before that, as opposed to kind of this predictable two-step schedule that I think makes things easier to implement. It's much more predictable, provides market certainty and all that. And, the importance of long-term market signals, I think, can't be overemphasized. When you send a predictable set of rules and signals to the market, you do get a lot more investment and better market response, I think, than things that change to a rapid degree. I think the bigger concern I have with this kind of option 1 versus option 2 is the uneven level playing field. As I understand this issue as being proposed, the proposal is to have a set of linear declining CI targets for one set of fuels and a two-step target schedule for another type of fuel. I think electricity. I didn't see that proposal being proposed for electricity. That is a fundamental inconsistency with the principles of market fairness, uneven playing field. And I think that's, there's a lot of language in Act 18 that goes to equitable opportunities. Just read, for example, Section 8124 requires the program to provide equitable opportunity. This is not a direct quote, but it captures the gist. Equitable opportunity to participate in and benefit from clean heat measures, regardless, and that's my emphasis, regardless of heating fuel used. And so I think one set of targets for one set of fuels and another set of targets for another set of fuels is fundamentally inconsistent with that requirement for equitable opportunity for participation in and benefiting from heating fuels. And with respect to the issue of lag, I would posit that when you have a two-step set of targets, you're actually encouraging much more reductions up front and in the early years. And I think from a climate standpoint, those early reductions, when you factor in the time value of carbon, is going to be much more important for addressing climate change than it would be getting those same reductions further down the timeline. So that's kind of my initial reactions to that. But thank you very much for putting this together. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Floyd. Any other comments from TAG members? I'll just say, Floyd, we're going to have a longer conversation, because I actually don't think I agree with you when you toss electricity into that, because I'll just say Vermont has already made its decisions about what its electric portfolio is going to look like, and that's just a given. But that's a separate. We can save that for another time. Any other thoughts?
I just, having completed sort of framing the issue, I'll just convey my personal opinion as a TAG member is that I am supportive of option 1, or I might also be open to entertaining some sort of like graduated step down every 3 years or every 5 years or something, like on a smaller increment, if that is significantly easier to manage. But I do think it does need to step down over time. I think that's consistent with the intention of the legislation, and would also note that the Global Warming Solutions Act kind of runs out in 2049. So if you wait till 2050, that's actually kind of past the period when we need those reductions to occur. So I think it's pretty clear that there was an intent to have this decline over time so that biofuels could continue to contribute to the actual greenhouse gas reduction goals in that period. So yeah, like I said, I would be open to considering some kind of different step down, but I don't think it should be a step down where it just remains 60 for 20 years and then jumps down to 20.
Okay, thanks. We're way over time now, so we've got a couple things to close here with. Catherine, jump in if you have any additional thoughts, but I will just say, and Jared, if you have any thoughts here you want to add, we've asked Jared to, as he's already mentioned, put together some thoughts on the public health impacts. The TAG's task actually revolves around public health benefits, but since benefits can be negative, we'll use the word impacts happily here. It's going to put together some language for us to consider about what the potential benefits and impacts of the clean heat standard might be without, I think, giving us, well, Jared, you say you're not in a position in certain cases to make any sort of empirical statements, but you're going to give us an idea of the range of impacts. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's good, Rick. Yeah, I think within 2 weeks, what I hope to bring back is just some sort of high level considerations on potential benefits or negative impacts. There's definitely some areas of uncertainty in there, so I want to be transparent about those. Some things we have a lot of evidence on, some things we don't. So it's going to be pretty high level, and I think we can talk about where we may need to go from there. I think doing something really detailed and quantitative is, that's way beyond my expertise and capacity. So I don't want to set, expectations of bringing OD level information into the conversation. But I can at least bring some of those starting point considerations. And I was going to ask, and I see Emily, your comment in the chat. Oh, that was just to me. To invite others assistance if this is a topic that's of interest, or if others have expertise. I don't need to do this alone. I would love to do this with others if
and I was going to extend the same invitation. TAG members, feel free to get in touch with Jared and offer your thoughts on these questions. That'd be great. Thanks, Jared. And we look forward to hearing from you. Emily Levin is offered, and you can give me a few moments here, Emily, to explain, to assist with NESCOM's capacity on the public health impacts. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Emily, at this point?
Yeah, I also don't want to promise a huge amount of detail, but we do a lot of, not me personally, but I have a lot of colleagues that have a lot of experience in taking emissions data and translating that into public health impacts, both costs and premature births, premature deaths, things like that, using tools like COBRA, which is an EPA health impact modeling tool. So I'm interested in kind of thinking through this a little bit and seeing if there's any quick and dirty way to do this. I don't, so that would give us at least some sense of impacts. I don't know. I have to think about this a little bit more and talk to some colleagues with more expertise, but just wanted to let you know we do have some expertise in this area. I've offered to help Jared too.
Great, thanks. Okay, we're definitely running up against our hoped for time. If we can get a few more minutes from folks, that'd be great. We are going to hear, as we've already heard, we're going to get text from others on various issues. So that will be part of our work next week or 2 weeks from now. It looks to me, and I've got to think this through, and it may have to be better done offline, but I think we may want to have an ad hoc discussion next week on a number of the issues that we've already touched on, just so we can better prepare ourselves for the meeting afterwards. So I'll have a confab with Catherine and Emily and others on this. Brian.
Yeah, so based on the deadline for comments on the TRMs, doesn't really align with report outs in 2 weeks. Well, it doesn't align.
Well, that's why if we meet next Thursday, we're still going to have problems because Friday is the 11th. Am I correct? Is my math right? I got the dates wrong before. You're right. You're absolutely right.
I was just going to chime in because I think when I saw that 10/11, I also didn't really compute that was before the next meeting. That's something that Opinion Dynamics did mention when they sent over the last deliverable. And I have asked if there's any way, I think there's been a lot of feedback back and forth between this group and Opinion Dynamics. I think a lot of the feedback has been heard, obviously, and incorporated, but there are very clearly some contentious issues that the tag probably should vote on. So I've asked if the group can identify those limited number of issues where it makes sense to have a vote, and for that feedback to come on the 17th, so 2 weeks from now. I'm hoping that's okay with Opinion Dynamics because I think those issues are very important to this group. I'm hoping it is a subset and it's not everything that's been brought up. Is kind of my hope.
Well, I want to make another related to that, Deirdre. Let me state something that has seemed to me always to be obvious and maybe not so to others, and that is what Opinion Dynamics delivers to the PUC is what it delivers under its contract. There will be public comment on it. There will be afterwards. There will be and there can be, of course, comment from the tag as well. One can imagine the tag saying, or public commenters or parties to the rulemaking as well, saying, this is what Opinion Dynamics says. We don't agree with it. The PUC ultimately still has to make a decision about the draft TRM that they get. Essentially, it's a draft. It's not the final. It's Opinion Dynamics' final product, but it's not the final TRM. So it's not the end of the world if Opinion Dynamics doesn't get all of our feedback on it. In my view, this is just my view, but I would love to be able to get as much back to them by next Friday as possible, and we can certainly do that through an ad hoc group next week, providing a memo with some responses, but they would not be formal responses from the tag. So for formal responses, it would have to wait until the week afterwards. Brian, do you still have your hand up?
Yeah, well, I put it down and I put it back up again. Yeah, of course, I agree with you. OD is working for the PUC and not us. I think we would welcome the opportunity to, and they certainly are interested in more guidance from us to the extent they can incorporate it. Just from the process standpoint, this is not going to be a vote and the end of it. This is going to be, the process we have been following is proposal, many of them drafted by you, Chair Weston, which is very helpful, and discussion. And that we come down to a vote, I expect that we are going to try to accommodate some kind of minority opinion in any kind of feedback that we ultimately would give to the PUC, and that's going to be another iteration and more time to be able to get to that. But I think you make a good point that OD is under contract, and they need to wrap up their work in some way, and this group's work will continue and can always say exactly what you said. We agree with that part. We don't agree with this part, and the PUC will work it out.
You're absolutely right, Brian. We've been thinking about this. It's still not entirely, well, it's still somewhat inchoate, but what I'm so far imagining is, at least with the texts that we expect to get and the ones we've had, and however we amend them and then vote on them, I think that we will be quite expressive to the PUC by just with the voting numbers themselves on various issues. We'll see how this works, but yes, you say minority opinion. What I would say is the balance of views will be reflected. how we come out on something or whether we do or don't will be reflected in what we forward to the PUC. Yes.
So Rick, can I suggest before we get to the end of our allotted time that we allow the public comment? And then if we have other issues we need to take up and the TAG members can stay, that's fine. But the public is really expected to stay beyond this time frame.
Yeah,
so I
know you perfect timing.
Yeah, so I'd like to open it up, and just because we don't have a lot of time and then we've covered a lot of territory, limit the comments to a minute, if you would. Pike?
Yeah, I have so Opinion Dynamics, thank you for your work, and thank you, at least one of you, for staying on to listen to these comments. The hardwood softwood ratio in your use of the World Wildlife Federation doesn't comport with the actual wood ratio in Vermont. I put a link in the chat earlier to the Vermont Forest website that says that, Vermont forests are primarily hardwood, 79%, I believe it was. I also put a screenshot of use of the World Wildlife Federation with the appropriate amount of ratio of hardwood to softwood, and come up with a GWP bio of 0.71. So I'd like you to change the ratio you're using and making sure that you're using the correct wood. I'd also ask you to go into the EPU-WCC website and look at my comments and other comments about wood, because whole tree chips and wood chips are not a waste product from mill residues. They are cut on site and shipped on site. And I provided 2 documents, state documents, that describe how low value wood, as we call it, is sourced. I'd also like to point out that while some of you have a broken link to the GREET model that's been used, most of us, not TAG members, don't have any kind of link. And I'd like you to share the GREET model that you're using with the rest of us so that we can also evaluate it and then see what's going on back there. And finally, to Deirdre, I sent comments to the reflect that, Dr. Grubert is not representative, is not here at these meetings. And email suggests that she won't be here till mid-January. So I'd like to ask the PUC to come up, find another climate scientist to counter some of the language we're hearing from the biofuel industry. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, Nick, your hand was up next.
Thank you. I submitted this morning some written comments on the public health issues involved in burning wood, and I hope you'll consider them. Jared and Emily this morning touched on some of the points that I raised, and I just wanted to say a couple of things. Yes, it's true that pellet stoves, pellets do burn cleaner than cordwood stoves. However, that's because they've been processed off-site, and I'd ask you to take into account the fact that pellet manufacturing facilities themselves often have horrible emissions and are located in EJ communities. I think that emissions from wood burning may be the most significant air quality issue that we have in Vermont. 59% of our fine particulate matter emissions, according to EPA data, are from residential wood burning. And it's concerning because we have a culture of wood burning. The public doesn't understand that there's a health issue. And it's also very concerning because this is not just a question of individual choice where people knowingly agree to do something that puts contaminants in their home. These stoves create neighborhood hotspots that subject neighbors to very dangerous levels of pollutants that are harmful to their health. And I hope this will be taken into account. Thank you.
Thank you. And Laura Height, you're next.
Hi, thank you. Just two points on the carbon intensity issue. There continue to be some incorrect assumptions being utilized by Opinion Dynamics, which makes me wonder if the materials that some of us have submitted, such as Pike's and my own, are being forwarded to them. This issue, the 50-50, species composition is an example. So, and to echo Pike's concern, members of the public, including people who have expertise in these issues, can't even ask the right questions if we can't see the same materials that the tag is reviewing. So I encourage you to share that. With regard to advanced wood heating, I just want to remind the tag that the legislative intent of the Clean Heat Standard is not just to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the thermal sector. The language says it also the intent is to minimize costs to customers, protect public health, and recognize that affordable heating is essential for Vermonters. So the criteria for advanced wood heating, which of course is not defined in the statute, is not going to just be the greenhouse gas emissions, but also the health, and perfectly appropriate in making a recommendation on the implementation of the law to say these things should not be utilized or considered because of their public health impacts, or to say these things can only be considered if they have the catalytic converter or whatnot, in addition to any carbon impacts. When we testified on this, PFPI testified on this bill before the legislature, we were aware that Vermont and 9 other states had petitioned EPA to review the performance standards for wood heating after the damning studies by NESCAM, and also that were confirmed by the EPA's Office of the Inspector General about the lack of really some very slamming language about how poor and shoddy the EPA certification system was for wood heating. We encourage the legislature to leave out advanced wood heating, or barring that, to delay the inclusion of wood heating until after these performance standards have been reviewed and hopefully revised. And also, since then, the federal PM 2.5 emission standards have been tightened up. So there's a lot of reasons to not invest in advanced wood heating at this time, and wait until all these regulations are tightened if you're going to invest in it at all. And so I want to encourage you again on that matter. EPA just, I think yesterday or in the past couple of days, signed a consent order with regard to reviewing the new source performance standards. And Nick has a link to that in his comments, and that's pending before the court, but that's going to put it back a few years before we have a review and hopefully improved performance standards for wood heating. So thank you very much for this opportunity to throw in a few more thoughts.
Appreciate that. We have a phone number ending in 5603. Could you identify yourself? And you're next.
This is Thomas Weiss. Thank you for taking my comments. And my comments go back to the step down of biofuel carbon intensities. And the cited statute in that document is the only place in statute that uses the term carbon intensity, and it is specifically limited to liquid and gaseous fuels. So step downs don't apply to electricity or to solid fuels such as wood. And I thought I heard some of the discussion going around that. So, and the only place that carbon intensity is used is determining whether those gaseous and liquid fuels are eligible for clean heat credits. So I guess bringing back into focus a little bit as to that cited statute section and its location in the overall clean heat standard. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
So that completes all the hands I see for public comment.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to sort of next steps. Oh, we haven't heard from the Equity Advisory Group liaisons.
Yeah, let's hear quickly from the EAG folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just gonna pull up my notes real quick. So during this week's Equity Advisory Group, we had a few guest speakers. We had Ben Edgerly Walsh from VPIRG. He presented on statistics of Vermonters and their adoption of energy efficiency measures and the IRA opportunity for meeting statewide climate goals. We heard from Mary Houghton and Gail Petzo about heating and cooling challenges in manufactured home communities, and that helped us fill out that section of the Equity Advisory Group report to the PUC due January 15th. And then the group started to discuss a plan to move forward with writing that report and also a plan to respond to the draft rule language that came out on Tuesday. And the last I wanted to note was that the group wants to take a look at the measure characterization study, mostly the installed measures. And so just flagging that Mia or someone from the Equity Advisory Group will most likely be in touch with Rick as how we might review that information with an equity lens and how to tackle that. And I'll hand it. I don't know if Matt's online and wants to add anything, but that's what I have.
Matt, if you're still here, doesn't look like he is.
A couple folks have dropped off.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. It seems clear to me that we're going to need some time next week amongst members who can get together and chat about responses to the TRM and also prep for discussions on the various issues that we've already identified. Catherine, can you think of other matters that we might want to take up?
Well, just want to acknowledge the draft rule that was shared on Tuesday, I believe, and the need for at least the TAG to take to review that and to find out whether there are any other issues that we should address that have been raised in that memo.
Right, right. The question for us will be, are there matters in the draft rule and in the memo, for that matter, that pertain to our statutory tasks? Yes, thank you.
So is that something we will just take up in general TAG discussion our next meeting?
Yes, in part, yes. But I would also add it to an ad hoc subgroup discussion as well. And what I'm going to suggest for matters of efficiency is that we sit down, you and I, Emily, and outline in more detail what we would have in mind for next week and the week after, and solicit input as appropriate from our TAG members in preparation for that. I certainly want TAG members to be thinking about the issues that matter to them. We've already identified a number of them, and we've given written assignments out there. But I'd like to go into the meeting in 2 weeks with as prepared as possible on, with a list of subject matter that we want to take up and come to some resolution of it on. And by resolution, it may mean no resolution, but that's fine. So with that, is that Catherine?
Yeah, well, I will, it sounds like I will send out an invite for the same subgroup members that were on the TRM to continue discussion.
Yep.
And I'm proposing next Thursday, same time we had it last Thursday.
Right.
And
of course, anyone's invited. Any member of the TAG is invited. We will not be making decisions. This is just preparatory discussions. That'd be great. And you and I will chat, Emily, as well, and others. If you have thoughts, please get back to us. Is there anything else then that we should?
One other item. We have canceled the Thanksgiving Day meeting. And Deirdre, I think, proposed on our new schedule that we should set up one the week before. Unless there's objections, you'll be getting an email from me or a new meeting calendar invite from me on that date, the 21st, for the same time, Thursday.
Jeez, I was prepared to have the meeting on Thanksgiving. I mean, gosh. Please take a look at the spreadsheet that was sent around. What you want to look at, just give you an idea of all the things that are on our docket, for lack of a better word, on our plate for the next 2 meetings at least. It's the tag schedule version 4. Deirdre and I did some work on it. What happens in November and afterwards are still need to be firmed up, but it gives you some idea of the things we're trying to accomplish or at least touch on before the end of the year. Thanks, everyone, so very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you all. Take care.